What public interaction made you want to rage quit the human race? I was seated in the back of a restaurant, which was pretty quiet. About halfway through my meal, an elderly couple sat in front of me. 10 minutes or so after they were seated, two men, in their early 20s maybe, sat down with them, obviously another couple. One of them was clearly the child of the elderly couple because, well, he called them Mum and Dad. Anyway, upon sitting down, the old people's kid introduced his boyfriend to them. Initially, the parents didn't know their kid was gay, from what I gather, because the dad became very angry and the mother actually started to cry. They said things like, "Where did we go wrong?" and "Being gay is a sin." Things like I'd expect homophobic parents to say to their gay kid, but somehow I didn't really think they ever would. The guy's parents left in a storm and he started crying. Not bawling, but some tears. His boyfriend consoled him and whatnot, and they paid and left without finishing their meal. I, of course, stared because the dad was nearly shouting, which I don't feel bad about because it allowed me to give the dad an absolute look of disgust as he left. The whole thing ruined my day. I'm eating Sonic next time and staying in my homophobe-free car. I was a waitress when I was 18. I worked one Father's Day and this old man was seated in my section. He didn't order anything because he said he was waiting for his children. He was dressed real nice and had this big smile on his face. After about 15 minutes, I asked him if he wanted an appetizer or anything while he waited. He was looking less happy at this point and he said no, he'd just wait for his kids. I ended up talking to him quite a bit between taking care of other tables. He hadn't seen his children in over 25 years and they'd promised they'd be there that day. He waited for an hour and a half. They never showed. When he left, he was crying silently and hadn't eaten anything. I used to work at a wildlife company at the local mall. You know, rain sticks, statues, Yanny CDs. One day, a little boy came in wanting to buy his mum a present. He was around 7 or 8 years old, I'd say. The kid wanted to buy a present for his mum and had a handful of assorted bills and change. We counted his money to see how much he had, and I took him around the store and showed him different things he could afford to buy. As we were looking, he saw a coffee mug with a nature scene on it that he loved, but he didn't have quite enough money for it. He only had about $5 and some change. I told him to go ahead and get it, and I chipped in some of my own money to make up the difference. He left the store smiling. A little while later, this angry woman came dragging the kid back into the store. She slammed the mug on the counter and insisted on an immediate refund. I thought she was just mad because I helped the kid spend his money on something. But then after I gave her back the money, she grabbed the kid by the hand and dragged him quickly out of the store, fussing at him saying, "Why would you buy me something like that? I'd never use something like that." My heart broke a little. Oh man, I guess this is going to be one of those sad videos, isn't it? I guess I'd better steel my soul and resolve not to be like these people. For the record, most of our parents are wonderful about pretending to like the garbage we get them when we're small kids. I used to babysit a couple of kids and their mum developed a big drinking problem. She kept vodka in a water bottle. A friend or relative or someone, I don't remember who, it was a long time ago, they went to grab her bottle from her and the daughter, who was about 6, leapt to mum's defense, yelling at the friend, "You can't take it, that's mummy's special water. She needs it to make her feel better." That girl would be about 15 now and I haven't seen her in years, but I can't help but wonder about how much she's worked out now about what was going on back then. I was eating in a Mexican restaurant and there was a family arguing next to me. The teenage daughter was crying while her father told her he'd always put his new wife, who was sitting next to him looking smug, before her. From what I heard, the poor girl had been kicked out of her home because she wasn't getting along with her stepmom. Ah, the old, "let's break the news in a restaurant, they won't make a scene" trick, famous for decades as a breakup method. It never works. I once saw 2 young groups of boys fundraising on 2 medians as cars passed. One was white, in some kind of sports team and scout uniform, and the other was black, I think with group t-shirts fundraising for sports uniforms. The white group was clearly making bank and the black one not doing well. I could see the black group leaders trying to hide their disgust and be optimistic, but it was awful. My car gave them $10 and they were really thankful for it, but it just wasn't enough to make up for having to stand there and experience the huge disparity. You could especially see some of the older kids who got it, looking like they wanted to give up. When I worked at GameStop, I was a lowly grunt organizing video games. Suddenly, this bigger lady with a cane came in with an opened Xbox 360, demanding a full cash refund even though the system was used, open, missing the game it should have come with, and some sauce was on the system. GameStop's policy is, if you open it, it's yours. Turns out her son had stolen her disability money that they rely on for food and rent, came to the mall and used all of it on the video game system. She was at the point of tears because we couldn't help her. Meanwhile, her son kept grabbing different games and was adding them to the counter, demanding that we ring them out for him because she was paying. The look on her face was incredibly sad, like her soul had been snatched away. My manager ended up giving her an 80% refund even though they'd kept the system for more than 2 months. As she walked out of the store dragging her bawling 12-year-old with her walking condition, it was painful to watch. I was at Walmart a couple of years ago looking for something in the electronics department. Walked up to the checkout stand just as the cashier took a personal phone call. All of a sudden, she lets out this awful scream and just completely loses it, sobbing and crying. Everyone is standing there in shock. One of her coworkers came over to comfort her, and I went on my way. Turns out she just found out her husband died in an accident. To this day, that sticks in my mind as the saddest thing I've ever seen. A group of us went to a bar for lunch. The hostess seats us next to 2 well-dressed middle-aged men and a well-dressed middle-aged woman. The woman is sobbing. We all think they've just told her that someone's died and are quiet out of respect to her. After a couple of minutes of this awkward quiet with the sobbing woman, one of the men grabs her hand and says quite loudly, "Not everyone believes in Scientology, Jeannie." My whole table lost it. Our high school marching band got hired to perform a private parade through a neighborhood, ending with a concert at a man's house. I was a freshman at the time and I remember how we made our horn arc and played as the guy and his wife stood outside. The wife had her arms crossed and unsmiling, just glaring at us and him the entire time. We found out after that the guy had apparently cheated on her with the babysitter and was trying to make it up to her. I'm not sure how he thought a crappy marching band concert at 9 a.m. was going to make up for that. My mum told me about one time when we went out to McDonald's when I was little. A man had sat down with his meal at a table and left to get ketchup. A woman with her kids sat down at the table and she threw his uneaten meal away. The guy came back and just stared at the table where his food had been and walked away. The saddest part was that the man looked homeless. It was probably his only meal that day. I saw a young child run up to his dad, crying and trying to hug the dad and all. The dad just kicks him off and says, "Frick off, you little brat." I wanted to punch the dude for it. Neglect is horrid. Damn. As a non-violent man who's never started a physical altercation and has lost every fight he's ever been in, I have a very strong urge to punch this guy who I've never met. God damn, some people suck. One time sticks out in my mind. Once while attending a convention at a casino, I was leaving and I saw a woman dragging her young kid in tow. He was crying his eyes out and I heard him say, "Mommy, you're not supposed to gamble anymore or we won't be able to afford food," or something to that extent. Poor little kid even knew she had a problem. School talent show, a young woman who was very shy had managed to get up the courage to sing a song. I can't remember the song, but it was a big one. She didn't have the voice for it and she lost the audience about 20 seconds in, whilst people started laughing and shouting things. They closed the curtain on her in the middle of her performance. I saw a first grader pee his pants on a field trip because his teacher wouldn't let him go to the bathroom. He then told everyone that he spilled his cereal on himself that morning and it was still wet. That first grader was me. I worked in a lumberyard here a long time ago. This man came in with his son and the kid had ratty clothes on, looked like his dad had just made him work all the time. The kid was about 10 years old. His shoes had holes in them and he just wasn't looking like he was well taken care of. So the radio was on and it was near Christmas and the kid asked about Santa because there was Christmas music on. The dad turns to the kid and says, "I frickin' killed Santa Claus, so don't worry about it." The kid at that point looked like he'd taken on all he could and started crying, and his dad told him not to cry like a woman and made him keep helping load his truck. The father even asked me not to help load anything because his son needed help learning to be a man. Just because some people might be interested like I was, if they were wondering if I did anything, Because it looks like the kid was maybe in deep trouble at home or something, I copied the guy's invoice from the computer, and since he comes in a lot, I asked my boss if he'd seen the guy do this stuff before. It turns out he's part of this weird cult here in Wisconsin. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. Tina was one of those horse girls. Every school has one, socially inept but a bit too in love with horses. Sad to say, even the kindest of kids began to make fun of her when she started to wear a saddle to school. One day in geography, the door burst open suddenly. It was Horse Girl's dad. He grabbed her by the hair and proceeded to scream the hell out of her. She did nothing but silently weep and stroke her plastic pony's hair. Turns out he was angry because she was learning about different countries in school. Police were called and she was escorted out. We never saw her again. Even us idiot 7th graders realized that her horse obsession was an escape from her awful father. We made things worse and we never had the chance to apologize. I don't know if she's dead or alive, or if alive, whether she's able to have anything approaching a fruitful life. One of my jobs is at a liquor store. This woman and her young 9-ish-year-old daughter used to come in almost every day. The woman always had some sob story about not having enough money, but always had $6 for her 3 tall cans of Bud Light. The daughter usually had enough for a piece of candy too. One day they came in and the kid was paying in nickels and dimes as usual and could only afford 2 beers. The daughter was short on her candy money, so I gave her 35 cents or whatever so she could afford her candy bar. Mum comes up to the counter as I'm ringing the kid up, immediately snatches the girl's money and uses it to buy her 3rd beer. She frickin' stole the money I gave to the kid to buy candy, to buy herself another frickin' tall can. The poor kid sucked it up like it was nothing. I assume it was pretty much par for the course in her family. I normally don't approve of violence against women, but I wanted to deck the mum. We had other customers in the store, and I didn't want to cause a confrontation in front of the kid, so I let it pass. The next day, Mum comes in alone and I let her have it with both barrels. Refused her service, chewed her out for stealing from her daughter and myself, told her to never come back. I normally don't call customers alky C-words either, but this time I made an exception. My high school had mainstreamed special ed kids. Basically, 1 or 2 special ed kids would be in normal English or humanities classes, the theory being that they picked up some social skills and the other kids learned that special ed people aren't mythological punchlines. This translated to a lot of the special ed kids wandering around the campus at lunch, which was alright, they were all pretty high-functioning, so it wasn't like they ran around screaming or strangling rabbits. One kid in particular was about 6'3" and chubby, constantly wore short shorts and just sort of wandered around being friendly. Everyone knew him on sight, and one day I caught sight of this kid, and out of nowhere he yells, "He's not my son!" I took that to mean the kid was parroting something he'd overheard, probably his dad yelling at his mum, and I felt horrible. Then I told one of my friends this, and he said, "No, stupid, he's singing Billie Jean." And he was. Turns out he was tone deaf and he loved shouting Michael Jackson songs. Okay, I know this may be cheating out of the subject matter a little bit, but come on, you can't blame the narrator for needing a break for some of the truly heartbreaking stuff. Okay, back into it, I guess. My husband's grandmother had just been placed in a nursing home around the time I'd first met her. One day we went with his parents to visit her. I was doing the awkward linger at the back, not knowing where to be or what to say, when the super old lady looks me dead in the eye and says, "I just want to go home." Her voice was tiny and her soul sounded so tired. I feel like part of me died that afternoon, because all I could offer her was a shock-induced, pursed lips smile. Those onions catch up with me every now and again. I was riding the commuter rail back home from work one night. It was pretty late, so the train was crowded and I could hear people speaking at the other end of the car. What looked to be a husband, wife, and 4 or 5 children, all younger than 12, were sat down with the dad talking to the fare collector. On this train, passengers have the option to pay in cash aboard the train. Well, it turns out this family didn't have enough cash to pay for all of the tickets. The father got into some sort of heated discussion with the fare collector, and the fare collector moved on to the next car. As soon as he left, the father starts ripping into one of his sons, who couldn't have been more than 10, for not making sure they had enough money for the tickets. Like he expected this kid to research ticket prices and make sure his parent had enough money. Truly ridiculous. I once saw a couple in their 40s or so walk out of a Kmart who were arguing about something. Both were loud, severely obese, smoking, and they appeared to have some mental disabilities. They sat down on a bench outside and continued to argue. After a few minutes, this old, crippled woman hobbled out of the store with a couple of grocery bags. She looked so weak, moving only a few inches with each step and barely able to lift her head. The couple got up, started walking with her, and it became clear that the couple were actually brother and sister, and the old lady was their mother. They kept arguing, saying things like, "I'm telling Ma, Ma, she hit me," just like children. The old woman didn't even have the energy to respond to them. I felt so bad for her. It looked like she'd been raising the same 6-year-olds for the past 40 years, never getting a break. Once on a camping trip, I saw a little boy running towards me. He yelled something like, "Help me! Somebody please help me!" He stopped when he saw me. His mother grabbed him shortly after that. When she dragged him away, he whispered something like, "Please don't hit me in my face this time." I told my mum, and she said it wasn't a big deal. I lost part of my childhood that day. I'm not really sure I can do this justice, but I'll try anyways. A female friend and I were waiting at this bus exchange a couple of summers ago, trying to get home from the beach. Basically, our route was sort of out of the way, so we were there for an hour waiting for it. We're sitting against this wall when this guy and this girl walk up to the stop, smiling and holding hands, looking like the perfect high school couple. I remarked how nice that was to my friend, and she's like, "Nah, that girl isn't happy. You can tell by her smile. Something's bugging her." And almost on cue, the girl looks down at her feet and says something really quiet, and the guy immediately zones out into traffic. Uh-oh. He mumbles something, and they had a good minute of silence. Then she looks at him, super sad, and they had a closure hug, expressing the harsh finality of it, I guess. Then as they separated, his hand slowly left her arm and she got on the bus. He turned in our direction, walking down the street, head down, with one of the most pained looks I've ever seen in my life. Not like open grief that people who have someone in their life die have, but the guy looked numb, like an empty husk or something. Meanwhile, the girl turns back as she's boarding the bus with this expression of regret and sadness and continues staring at him as the bus drives past him. So after we watched this in silent awe, I turned to my friend and said, "Did we just watch a real-world movie breakup?" Like 5 minutes later, our bus gets there, and as we're driving down the road, we see the same kid again, wiping away his tears. This actually happened to me the summer before my senior year of high school. I had a tutor coming to my house for a 3-week period because I was taking some AP classes next year and wanted to make sure I wouldn't be lost in class. So it's the second to last day of my tutoring, and as we're on the deck at my house going through problems, I hear my parents arguing. They always had stupid arguments about nonsense, so I didn't think anything of it right away. A few minutes later, my mum storms out the back door in tears saying, "I can't do this anymore." My father, an alcoholic, walks out behind her, still carrying the argument, and just sounded like a jerk. They continue to yell and scream about whatever it was, and finally, my mum just leaves. This whole time, I'm just sitting there, 17 years old, on my way to play college football after my senior year, and I just watched my mum leave my dad, my 4 younger siblings, and myself right in front of my tutor. She was an older woman, and I could tell she felt absolutely horrible for my siblings and I. It wasn't exactly in public, but I was so embarrassed that she had been there to see all of this happen. In short, my parents split up while I had a tutor helping me at my house the summer prior to senior year. I haven't seen my mum since. Happy Mother's Day, I guess. I grew up in a western state where raising animals for 4-H is common. Obviously, you end up spending about a week at the state fair before you auction the animals off. My friends and I would get bored, and once we rigged up this giant fake spider that we won on the midway to drop from the rafters of the animal barn. We were probably about 13 or 14 years old. We dropped it in front of this rather macho-looking 30-something-year-old guy walking with his girlfriend, and the dude flipped. He screamed like a 13-year-old girl, knocked his hat and Oakleys off his head, and nearly crapped his pants. After he realized it was fake, the embarrassment set in like an out-of-control train. He started yelling at us and threatening to kill us. His girlfriend was laughing hysterically and complimenting us on our brilliant prank. He then started threatening her. Fortunately, there were plenty of people around, and soon enough, the fair security arrived and hauled him off. At first we felt bad, but then we realized this guy obviously had anger issues that the girlfriend was unaware of, otherwise I doubt she would have laughed. My guess is she would have been afraid, and we perhaps ended up saving her from years of bad treatment. To this day, I'm proud of my accomplishment. It was the best prank of my life. What's a rule that was implemented somewhere that massively backfired? My city has issues with loud bikes and vehicles, so as a deterrent, the city put up decibel meters that displayed how loud your engine is, similar to those signs that read your speed and display it to you. But instead of deterring anyone, people would pull up to those signs and rev the heck out of their engines to see who could get the highest decibel count. The city took the counters down within a week. I work in manufacturing and we get paid piece rate, so the more I run, the more I get paid. We also have a base hourly pay rate of $10 per hour, so whichever pays more, the hourly rate or the piece rate, is what we get paid for the day. On bad days, sometimes they bump us up to $12 an hour for the day, and when we train new people, we get paid $15 an hour to compensate for having to slow down or stop our machines to teach the new people. The big boss, my boss's boss's boss, came in last week. Now, he used to work the line like I do now, but you can tell he's living comfortably in his corporate life and has forgotten some of the bad parts of this job. He told my boss that we are no longer to receive training pay because, by his logic, if we're working with someone, we should be making more than $15 an hour anyway. And these past 3 weeks or so, we have been doing a lot of training. So a few of us got together at the end of the day and agreed, if they aren't paying us, we won't train people. We will teach the new people enough to make us some money and leave the training to the designated trainers. 2 people split between 15 or so new hires, but they make $17.50 an hour. The policy lasted 4 days. Buddy of mine told me about a happy hour promotion a bar ran close to his campus. Apparently the special was something stupid like 50-cent beers that lasted until the first person went to the bathroom. As he tells it, the first few weeks went without incident, but once it became more popular, people were going to extreme lengths to not be that guy, including wearing adult diapers. Once people tried to covertly pee in corners and trash cans, the bar cancelled the promotion. At my old job, someone abused lunch, so they made a few of them text in when they started and finished lunch. One guy specifically would text the start time, place he got food, his order in detail, the address, price, etc., even when he bought a snack while out. That stopped a week later. Good old malicious compliance, the greatest form of rebellion against an overregulated, lifeless workplace. Worked for a marketing firm that often locked you out of the building if you weren't back in your cubicle by the second your break was up. They revoked your break the next day as punishment. This is not legal here in New York State. They got into a lot of trouble. The organizers of the 1994 Caribbean Tournament Cup had a rather odd change to the rules for extra time. If a game was still drawn at full time, it would go to extra time, but the first goal scored would win. This is perfectly normal, the golden goal rule. What was different is that they ruled that winning this way would count as having won by 2 goals for the purpose of the tournament qualification, instead of just 1. Barbados went into a match against Grenada needing 2 goals to qualify for the main tournament. If they lost or won by only 1 goal, Grenada would qualify instead. Under the regular rule, this would mean that if the match went to extra time, there would basically be no point in Barbados playing because even if they scored, they would only win by 1 goal and not qualify. But the 2-point roll would motivate them to play on. Sound good? Well, you might be able to guess what happened. The match looked like it was about to end with Barbados 2, Grenada 1. A win for Barbados, but not the 2 goals they needed. So Barbados deliberately scored an own goal in the last few minutes of the match, making the score 2-2, hoping to trigger extra time and a chance to score the magic 2-value goal. The Grenada players quickly realized they could do the same, score an own goal to make the match 3-2 to Barbados, which would have Barbados winning by only 1 goal so Grenada would qualify. But the Barbados players realized that too, and so they began to defend Grenada's goal. So for the last 7 minutes of the match, Grenada were trying to score a goal in either net, since scoring a goal against Barbados would give them 3-2 and they would win the match, and scoring in their own goal would make it 3-2 to Barbados, so they would lose the match but win the qualification, and Barbados were defending both. Amazingly, Barbados did actually manage to do so, successfully defending themselves while half of their team were defending Grenada's goal against Grenada, and then scored the golden goal in extra time and qualified. When Domino's said all pizzas would be delivered in 30 minutes or less or your pizza was free, all the delivery drivers kept getting in car accidents to get your pizza to you on time, so it wouldn't come out of their paycheck. It was a short-lived venture. My company has a strict no-alcohol policy. You can't begin work within 10 hours of having had a drink. So when there's a staff shortage and they need me to come in right away, guess who just cracked open a cold one? My work has an infraction system. If you're a minute late, that's half a point. If you're up to 4 hours late, that's half a point. So if you're going to be a minute late, you might as well be 4 hours late because it's the same penalty. For those of you who keep pointing out that you would miss 4 hours of pay, I know. My work is weird and lets you fill in missing time with a PTO at the end of the work week. We also don't get sick days. So you have to take PTO if you are sick, and even then you're likely to get points because you called in less than 24 hours before your shift starts. It's not an issue if you get half a point and don't get another for 6 months, because the first one will have fallen off by then. English law in Wales set the death penalty for stealing a sheep. Welshmen caught stealing sheep would claim to be making love to them. They would get a lesser penalty for bestiality. The consequence of this is that the Welshmen gained a reputation as sheep shaggers. A famous example from Freakonomics was when a daycare started charging a small fine for parents who picked up their children late. Instead of resulting in more on-time arrivals, the new policy actually caused more late pickups. This is because the parents were originally worried that a late pickup would be a significant burden on the daycare employees. But because the fine was so small, only a few dollars, they decided that it must not be a big inconvenience for the daycare. Alcohol bans at college football games has led to increased intoxication problems because fans are loading up before going in the stadium. Yep, funny how people turning up to a game loaded instead of gradually getting tipsy over 2 hours might have increased the occurrence of boozed-up altercations. Worked for a warehouse 4 days a week, 11 a.m. through 9:30 p.m. Monday to Thursday. They reiterated many times during the interview process that overtime was optional. My first day, my supervisor told me that overtime is indeed optional, but if you don't stay for overtime, then everybody else has to stay even later. So if you do leave on time, don't come back. Whatever. I didn't mind the extra hours too much, although a 10.5-hour shift is already long. But the bonus was that we could all go early if all the orders were done. As you can imagine, the good workers busted their butts from start to finish cutting as many corners, good and bad ones, as they could in order to get out early. Normally, this ended up with us being able to leave around 15 minutes early, or on a really good day where the stars aligned, i.e. everyone showing up, we could leave as early as 7:30 or 8. However, leaving that early only happened once or twice a year at most. Overtime was every week. Every single Monday we would work until 2 a.m. 11 a.m. to 2 a.m. isn't ideal when you have no idea when you're off. At around 7 p.m. we'd start to get an idea if we're in for another hour or another 6. One of the genius new hires mentioned to the boss in the office how he was hoping to get out by 6. Oh, good. Apparently, the boss was thinking us leaving early was a common occurrence now and decided that no one was going to be leaving early anymore. Sweep or dust or whatever, but no one leaves until 9:30. All of a sudden, we were late every single day without fail. Why? We were working our butts off to get out early, but failing every day and ending up on time or still late. By taking away our ability to leave early, everyone gave up working hard. Slow down, we got another hour left anyways. I'm not sweeping. Went from about 45 hours a week to 55. 13 hours every day. Nobody ever left early anymore, but nobody left on time either. Losses for everybody involved because the boss didn't realize that us leaving early for 2 days out of a year actually gave us the daily motivation to work our butts off on the other 360. In conclusion, boss put a stop to leaving early. No incentive to work our butts off anymore means paying overtime every day. I worked at Macy's one Christmas and found out the reason why you can never find anyone at the registers. It's because they don't allow employees to stand at the register, because it's intimidating. I can't tell you how many times I gave up trying to purchase something there because I couldn't find anyone to ring me up. One of the high-rise blocks I have to maintain has a sign saying, "Anything left here will be removed due to it being a fire risk." People just dump the crap there they don't want, like fridges and sofas, and by law, we have to take it. F me, right? To clarify, I have no authority to put up cameras as they are council blocks, and I'm a council worker that has zero help from management, because quite frankly, they don't give a crap because they don't have to remove it. Congrats, British taxpayers, you pay me to remove jerks fly tipping daily. I'm sorry for the crappy human beings on this earth. The British government was concerned about the number of venomous cobra snakes in Delhi. The government therefore offered bounty for every dead cobra. Initially, this was a successful strategy, as large numbers of snakes were killed for the reward. Eventually, however, enterprising people began to breed cobras for the income. When the government became aware of this, the reward program was scrapped, causing the cobra breeders to set the now worthless snakes free. As a result, the wild cobra population further increased. The apparent solution for the problem made the situation even worse. Ah yes, bounty systems. Abused at the cost of almost everyone apart from the hunters themselves, nearly every time they've been introduced in history. Case in point. In French Indochina, there was a major problem with rodents eating supplies and bringing disease. Given the plentiful supply of cheap unemployed workers, the colonial authorities thought they could be used to kill the rats and bring their numbers down. The French had a somewhat racially prejudiced view of the work ethic of the locals, so decided to pay them per rat killed, rather than per hour worked. Each was compensated for every dead rat they handed over. A year or so later, the colonial authorities discovered the peasants had set up rat breeding farms in the jungle. Dry counties were meant to reduce the use of alcohol in certain areas, but they resulted in people who wanted to get drunk driving further away from home to do so, increasing the odds and frequency of drunk driving accidents. Also, many attempts to rescind dry county laws ended up getting countered by campaigns paid for by the bars and liquor stores that set up on the edge of dry counties, typically under the guise of religious messages. Yesterday in Kenya, our governor in Nairobi banned public transport from getting to town, so people had to walk long distances to work. And since we don't have enough pavements, people ended up walking on the roads, like 3,000, and there was a traffic jam that lasted for more than 5 hours. The next day, the ban was removed. Question 1. What was the goal of banning public transport? They thought public transport was the reason behind all the traffic jams and noise pollution, which is wrong. Easiest way to fix things is to inconvenience people with money and power. Washington state made it mandatory for schools to drop their room temperatures to save on electricity. The result? Teachers brought their own heaters into the offices and use of electricity increased. Not a law. My school does this and have made it clear it costs $1,000 a day to heat our buildings. They dropped the temp and it can be 50 degrees Fahrenheit in the morning in my classroom. Everyone has space heaters, which are illegal by the fire code. Admin and maintenance freak out over it, but refuse to turn up the heat as they sit in their separately heated offices at a comfortable temperature. Not sure if it's still the case, as I graduated many years ago, but where I went to college, the hospitals had a thing where if someone came in with alcohol poisoning and they were underage, then they'd also call the cops. So of course, what happened was when underage kids really should have gone to the hospital, their friends wouldn't call an ambulance because of fear the cops would punish people. Luckily, while I was there weren't many deaths due to alcohol poisoning, but there were more than 0. I worked somewhere with a clean desk policy on Friday afternoons. The common way around this was that everyone would just sweep all their paperwork into an envelope, stick it in the internal mail, and then it would arrive back on your desk on Monday morning. At one point in history, the president of Paraguay tried to eliminate racism by making it illegal to marry someone within your own ethnic group. Needless to say, this was quite racist. You have to eat whatever you touch was a rule in my kindergarten which led to all the children touching all the food to call dibs on it. Head teacher at the school I worked at made it a rule that the primary-aged kids, 5 through 11, weren't allowed to run when they were out in the playground. That was fun to try and enforce. Let's not allow young children to run on the playground during their recess at school. What could go wrong? Why are the kids getting so fat? Middle school wanted to create a trash-free environment, so they removed the trash cans from the parking lots, halls, and cafeteria. Then just told the kids to toss your trash when you get home or in a classroom. The amount of litter skyrocketed overnight. After a week or so, they brought back the cans. Last summer in Sweden, bus drivers in some counties started wearing shorts due to the heatwave. After being denied to continue doing so by management, they started wearing skirts instead. Dress code policies had banned shorts, but not skirts. Okay, I lived in Sweden during that time and I never saw this. I desperately hope it's true. Gotta love that country. Air pollution became a big problem in the late 80s and early 90s Athens, mostly due to the number of old, heavily polluting cars on the roads. So the Greek government made a law where only cars with odd-numbered final digits on their number plates, 1, 3, 5, and 7 and 9, etc., could be driven on odd-numbered days. 1st, 3rd, 5th, etc., and only even-numbered cars could drive on evenly numbered days. Sounds great, doesn't it? They'll halve the number of cars on their roads, right? No, they doubled it. Everyone brought one old, highly polluting car that had an odd-numbered plate and another with an even-numbered plate. Nobody could park and the air was worse than before. A hotel I used to work for decided they were having an alcohol-free holiday party. This didn't sit well with the people who'd been working there for years and were accustomed to a full bar at the party. The staff parking lot ended up being full of people drinking in their cars, trying to get a good buzz to carry them through the party, and most people ended up getting way drunker than they would have done so. The party was a crap show. My friend had a non-alcohol wedding. Nearly everyone took fairy dust instead, completely opposite of the sober event the parents wanted. The previous school I worked at decided that all shirts needed to have the school name or emblem, which was a fancy letter E, on them to be dress code appropriate. That's all the handbook said. No clarification on how the name or emblem was displayed, or the color, or if it had to be permanently affixed to the clothing. The students hated the policy, and being in high school, looked for any loophole possible. They found one due to the lack of clarity of the handbook policy. The kids would make paper E's and pin them to their shirts. Thus, they could wear whatever they wanted, and by pinning the E to the shirt were still dress code compliant. I thought it was pretty genius. The administration did not. Explicit adult content being banned on Tumblr. If you look for why LiveJournal failed, you'll read that it was old and obsolete or new platforms were hipper. Nope, it did two things. Number 1, made itself harder to use with crappy new features. Number 2, it banned adult content. Wait, I thought weird adult content was all Tumblr was good for. If I want wholesome, pointless bullcrap, Pinterest already exists. If they took adult content off Tumblr, there'd only be one blog left called Bring Back the Adult Content. Catholic school. This school started out not having a problem with Harry Potter. Library had every available book at the time. Not all were even written yet. Some paranoid parent cried Satanism and witchcraft, so the school banned Harry Potter. Suddenly, Harry Potter books are an underground commodity. The school had a black market trade for new and used Harry Potter books, and things only got worse when expulsion was threatened for being caught with one. A new Harry Potter book was worth its weight in gold. Finally, the school had to go all the way to the bishop about the Harry Potter books, and he said, "No, the books don't really teach Satanism. What is all this about a black market book trade?" So the school lifted the ban and told the parents to cool it. Doesn't this happen in one of the Harry Potter books when Umbridge bans the issue of the Quibbler where Harry has told the truth about Voldemort returning? Suddenly everyone had to get their hands on it and read it because it was prohibited. I worked at a contract agency that works with Child Protective Services. CPS policy is to never tell the parents who called CPS on them, but my agency's policy was to always inform the primary caretaker if one of our social workers called it in. Obviously, this irrevocably destroyed our rapport with our clients. Imagine telling a parent you called CPS on them only to knock on their door the next week to listen to their concerns. The agency made an asshat out of us, and all potential for case progression was out the door. Stupid rule, if you ask me. A salon I worked at one day decided to drug test the hairstylists. Out of the 12 stylists, 11 failed. Their manager texted everybody the next day and told them to come to work. I'm a stylist and I say this to applicants all the time. If they drug tested, there wouldn't be anyone working here. No card games at school. When I was in elementary or middle school, Magic the Gathering and the Pokemon card game were pretty popular. Almost all the guys played and would get together after lunch to play before classes started again. Here is where it's important for me to mention that this was a Christian school. It probably didn't take long for a teacher, administrator, or helicopter parent to wonder what all the fuss was about. Sure enough, one of them probably got a hold of a Magic the Gathering card, saw art depicting a demon, and decided that this had to be the work of Satan to warp our young minds. Almost overnight, all trading card games were banned from school. Any cards would be confiscated until the end of the school year. Well, now you have several dozen prepubescent boys with about 30 minutes of free time and nothing to do. So we did boy crap. Ran around, pushed each other, went places we weren't supposed to, just overall got into mischief. All this time, they had a free babysitter that was keeping us all engaged, quiet, civil, all while reinforcing quick math skills and teaching multi-level problem solving. The next year, we got a new administrator and card games were allowed at school again. When I was in school in the era of Pokemon cards, if you'd tried to take ours away, there would have been a full-blown revolt. This school, if anything, got off lightly. When I worked for immigration, some bright spark decided that we weren't going to remove people who had been caught smuggling illicit substances from certain countries. They believed it was too risky to deport people who had failed to complete their jobs back to angry gangs. News traveled quickly, and within a few weeks there was a huge spike in smuggling. People were smuggling over illicit substances and immediately handing themselves over to authorities to guarantee they wouldn't get deported. In addition, dealers found it much easier to convince people to attempt to smuggle illicit substances because it was a win-win for all parties. The whole idea was scrapped pretty quickly. Not exactly a rule, but just last week my job thought it was a good idea to take away our electric cart pusher machine because they felt we didn't need it. The very next day, the place was absolutely packed and we couldn't get carts in fast enough. In an attempt to discourage surfing during work hours in 50s Australia, the government brought into effect a law which stated that any man surfing before 5 p.m. would have to do so in a dress. This prompted more people than would usually be surfing during the daytime to don their wives' dresses and head down to the beach and surf for the couple of weeks the law existed. Lawyers, has there ever been a time the opposing counsel accidentally proved your case for you, and what happened? My favorite is a story from Gary Spence. For those of you who don't know, he's a famous trial attorney. A witness on the stand was claiming that he suffered injuries to his arm because of a city bus accident. Jerry asked him to demonstrate to the jury how far he can lift up his arms after the accident. The witness makes a feeble effort of lifting his arm. Then Jerry asks the witness to demonstrate to the jury how far he could lift his arm up before the accident. He lifts his arm much higher. The jury laughs. The case is over. Domestic violence case where the husband beat the wife senseless. Landlord tried to evict wife for breach of lease due to the beating. Landlord claimed wife violated lease terms by allowing police to be called to property and causing a disruption. My argument was that as a domestic violence victim, wife is covered under the VAWA, and the property is HUD subsidized. Also, MD law offers domestic violence protections too. Landlord's counsel during his opening talks about how my client was beaten and the police were called and an ambulance, etc. I just stood there looking at him. When he finished, judge asked if I had anything to say. My response, "No, Your Honor, I believe opposing counsel has said everything that needs to be said." The judge smiled and ruled in my client's favor. Landlord can't evict a domestic violence victim. My family did foster care for a few years and we fell in love with the last girl we took in, now my younger sister. She was required to keep in regular touch with her emotionally and physically abusive birth mum, the intention being for them to eventually reunite. This woman was a horror. Every single time they interacted, she'd spend the duration painstakingly shredding my sister's self-confidence. My parents worked hard to establish a strong rapport and supportive environment, and she blossomed under their care. She's one of the most resilient people I know. When the state tried to return her to her mum, she didn't want to go, so my parents sued, I think, don't really know all the legal details, for guardianship. This seemed like it would be an uphill battle. Here we were, a family of randos trying to steal a kid from her rightful mum. We were really afraid she would have to go back and that her crappy family would systematically undo all the hard work she'd done rebuilding her self-esteem. Fortunately, her idiotic mum decided to represent herself at the guardianship hearing. I wasn't in the room, but I heard the audio recording later on, and it's incredible how thoroughly this woman shot herself in the foot. Some highlights. She kept trying to testify while cross-examining people. Would it surprise you to learn that blah blah blah? The judge called her out for this like 6 separate times and she just kept doing it. She would admit to various incidents of emotional abuse, but then tried to argue that it was all justified because her daughter was being a B-word. She'd ask witnesses, for example, "And wouldn't you be angry if your daughter did XYZ? Yes or no?" My personal favorite and best example of her proving our case.
It's absolutely not true that I hit my daughter with a wooden spoon. I only tried and missed. I'll prove it. I can show you the mark I left in the door frame.
Needless to say, we won guardianship. My sister never has to see that awful woman again unless she damn well pleases. The Dunning-Kruger effect occurs when a person's lack of knowledge and skills in a certain area cause them to overestimate their own competence. This lady may be a walking, talking example of said effect, both in her capacity as a parent and a lawyer. I worked as an intern for a lawyer. Construction laws in France are quite strict in regards to the neighboring of historical monuments. The city was denying a permit for heavy modification of the house of our clients. They were arguing that because you could see the house from the church's bell tower, modifications were impossible. As a support, they kindly linked us a 360-degree picture from said bell tower. We, as kindly, pointed out to them that our client's house was indeed not visible from the top of the church. Building permit was greenlit the following day. Not a lawyer, but I am a former insurance fraud investigator. We were at a hearing before the WCB. I had something like 18 hours of video spread over a 2-week period of a claimant doing roofing work. The problem for me was that the video didn't get a clear face shot. Normally, what we liked to do was get in close, show the face for positive identification, and then zoom out. Bonus if the claimant was wearing distinctive clothing that could be easily tied to him. Because of where this guy lived, all I could do was show someone who matched his description getting out of a truck registered to him every morning. He wore a hat, he had a beard, and he had neither at the hearing. So the company lawyer is prepping me and basically letting me know to be on point because the claimant's attorney is almost certainly going to challenge the fact that it is his client in the video. If the video got tossed, the case was lost. About 2 minutes into the hearing, claimant's attorney agrees to stipulate to the fact that it is his client in all of the video. All of it. Our attorney was shocked. That was pretty much the only leg he had to stand on. Claimant attorney was incredibly smug right after this, like it was no big deal. Evidently, his strategy was to show that his client wasn't really a professional roofer since he was doing the roof the wrong way. He tried to get me to answer questions about roofing. I refused as it was beyond the scope of my work, and he just wouldn't let it go. After about an hour of back and forth over this, the judge finally said, "Counselor, it doesn't matter if your client is doing the work well. What matters is that he has stated numerous times under oath that he cannot work. Whether he's doing it for free, for cash, or for fun, has no bearing on the fact that he's doing roofing work while collecting compensation benefits, which he was awarded because he couldn't do roofing work." The guy lost and had to repay a bunch of benefits. After a few of those hearings, I began formulating a list of lawyers I would never hire and ones who I would absolutely want on my side. I had to go to court over a financial screw-up when I was a student. Took advice from the university legal support team who said I didn't need a solicitor, so I went alone. The judge didn't like this and postponed it for another date so I could prove I'd had more counsel first. The other party's solicitor caught me outside the court and said, "I didn't tell you this, but..." and pointed out a huge error in the financial paperwork that made it very obviously come out in my favor. Went back to legal support, got confirmation that it was right, went to the second hearing alone and got the entire thing thrown out. The other solicitor winked at me as he left. Saved me about $9,000. Nice chap. Not a lawyer, but took my brother-in-law's landlord to small claims court. He's on SSI and I'm his conservator. We sued her for over $4,000 after she just decided she didn't like him and changed the locks on his apartment door. She also stuffed all of his belongings into trash bags and dragged them out to the curb. This was all done the day after she cashed his rent check. It all started because she was letting herself into his apartment with no notice and was going through his stuff while he was gone. When I found out about this, I told him to let her know that it was not okay. He did, and that's why she kicked him out. I'm very organized and presented the judge with a folder containing photos, receipts, short videos on DVD, and the sheriff call logs, as well as a concise timeline of events. The landlord showed up with her son and countersued for the exact same amount we were suing them for, claiming that the apartment was trashed, there were holes in the walls, and they would have to repair everything before being able to rent again. During the hearing, the judge asked for evidence of the damage to the room. The son whipped out his cell phone and showed a video panning and walking around the room. The video showed my brother-in-law's apartment obviously still being lived in. His stuff was all still there, and no visible damage, but there were a lot of posters and things hung on the walls. When the judge looked at the video, he asked, "Where's the damage?" The son replied, "You can't see it. It's behind all the posters." The judge frowned and looked at the video again and said, "Did you take this video when he was still living here at the time?" The son replied, "Yes." This was the clincher. The judge then asked, "Did you ask his permission to enter the apartment to take the video?" Silence. We were awarded the full amount. There is just something so deliciously satisfying about this kind of case. A bunch of dishonest, awful people being utterly destroyed for their dishonesty. I had a misdemeanor possession case I was defending. Client was driving his mum's car. He gets pulled over for playing the stereo too loud. There are pills in the center console, in a prescription pill bottle. The bottle has his mum's name on it. Client gets arrested and charged with possession of a controlled substance without a prescription. Case is obviously bullcrap, but the dumbest DA I've met in my entire life won't dismiss. We go to trial. During closing arguments, the DA says, "This case is a circumstantial evidence case." During my closing, I slap the jury instruction on the projector that says if a case is based on circumstantial evidence and there is one factual scenario that points to guilt and one that points to innocence, the jury must find in favor of the defendant and acquit. My client was acquitted. I had a hearing where the opposing party offered an updated contract that my client supposedly signed, except it was a horrible copy and barely readable. Then he assured the judge that the new same as the old contract, except for the party name at the top. The original contract was in his mum's name, the new one in his name, and the date of the contract itself. He made that assurance multiple times. After he exhausted himself saying how everything was the same, I then pointed out to the judge that half the provisions were different, and that my client had never signed that form. The judge asked if we were really accusing him of forging my client's signature, since that's a serious accusation. I held up the guy's prior conviction for contract fraud and said, "I absolutely am, Your Honor." We won, hands down. No further argument needed. My dad's ex-girlfriend took us to court over his estate after he kicked her out. Her claim was that she was entitled to half the pie due to the de facto marriage. She had mountains of evidence of her contribution to Dad's company and running the private estate. Expense reports, receipts, dates and times her and Dad proved their relationship with trips and combined spending, etc., etc. She had so much evidence, the judge took 4 days to look it all over, after which he came back and basically said, "Why the heck would you have all this if this wasn't your plan the whole time?" The case was very downhill from there. Okay, for some more clarification, she'd done the same thing to her ex-husband, giving precedent. He and her children said so in their testimonies. One of her children even inadvertently admitted she'd told them what to say and paid them for it. We were able to name the date the relationship between her and my dad ended, which was months before she claimed, and outside the time limit to make it de facto common law marriage. We had testimony from the doctor at his ICU who said she tried to keep everyone, including his ex-wife, our mother, and us, his children, away from him. Meanwhile, she had his phone and computer and was trying to take over his contacts and businesses. We had proof of this. Her lawyer was a moron who constantly contradicted himself and the evidence. He lost documents, gave incorrect dates, and asked irrelevant questions of the defense. In the end, it was that her expenses for the relationship were deemed normal for anyone in any kind of romantic relationship, that gifts and meals aren't claimable for compensation, and that her contributions to the household and business were not sufficient to warrant compensation. She never actually put any money into either, and that the relationship was not sufficient in duration to qualify as a common law marriage. This case took 4 frickin' years to settle, including 2 elevations of appeals. She finally gave up because she'd run into about $250,000 of court fee debt, as well as being forced to pay us $40,000. Not a lawyer, but was taken to court once. A guy had taken my family to court basically because he had been dating my mother, and things ended. Every cheeseburger, every Kit Kat. He even billed for things he did like house repairs. Some of the repairs were terrible and ruined other things. He tried to unclog the sink and ended up destroying the main drain pipe for the house. Now, he had bought some more expensive things as well. No one asked him to, but he was one of the types that loved to show how much money he had and would always talk about his connections and would name drop someone anytime we went anywhere. So when he takes us to court with his full itemized list, the judge asks him to go first and present his testimony. He basically says, "While I was with them, I brought all this stuff. I took them to dinner all the time and all this, but it was the idea it would be paid back by them." Judge: "You brought a child a birthday cake with the idea it would be paid back. Did you ever say that these things were loans and not gifts?" Him: "Well, no, but I shouldn't need to. That's the normal way people think." Judge: "Well, that's not the way I think. Case dismissed." Imagine having such a jaded view of your own kind of dating ability that you take precautions to do this kind of thing if people have the nerve to break up with you. Ugh. Relative of a retired prosecutor. Relative was working misdemeanor criminal court. Cases get called in alphabetical order, and two women named Catherine Smith and Catherine Smith, with a K, were scheduled to have their hearings before the judge. Not their actual names, but you get the point. Both had similar names, but slightly different. So the bailiff announces the next case to the courtroom. Catherine Smith, with a C, for 1 count of possession of white powder with the intention to sell, and 1 count of selling her body. So Catherine Smith, with a K, stands up and indignantly cries, Whoa, just wait a second. Where the hell did the working girl charges come from? I may deal yayo, but I am not a working girl." Easiest illegal substance case my relative ever prosecuted. Actual lawyer here. From the Fool for a Client file. Was interning at Legal Services after 1L, doing discovery work for family law. My supervisor invited us to observe a hearing for our client, to get a restraining order against her husband. At the hearing, the client discussed various times he threatened her. The man, representing himself, interrupted and said, "Judge, I never said any of those things. If I had, she wouldn't be standing here." Restraining order granted. Not a lawyer, but here's a story from the burbs. My buddy's psycho neighbor built a wall too high and doesn't have proper drainage on his property for the very small creek/natural drainage in between their yards. My buddy hired an attorney as the psycho decided to sue him over it. My buddy's engineer looked over the property and noted not only did my buddy set his yard up right, but the neighbor created drainage problems. Neighbor hired his own engineer that proved my buddy was correct. Now the guy is likely to go postal. Case was going through to mediation. Since both engineers found fault with the psycho neighbor, my buddy decides he's going to take it to trial. Turned the tables a bit. I'm not a lawyer, but witnessed a pathologist win a case in court by destroying the defense's credibility. The question was over whether or not carbon monoxide poisoning could have caused certain signs of death in an individual, but the defense didn't study their chemistry very well and kept asking the pathologist whether carbon dioxide could have caused these signs. After thoroughly frustrating the defense by answering his questions incorrectly, the pathologist said very loudly, "Oh, I'm sorry, did you mean carbon monoxide? Because that's a completely different thing." Completely destroyed the defense's credibility in front of the jury. They were done after that. So I guess the opposing counsel screwed himself by not picking up a book. For clarification, this is not the only reason that lawyer didn't win. There were a lot of other things that didn't work out in his favor, but those were technical things that he probably knew about ahead of time. This was a case where he was asking questions that he thought were going to work out in his favor, but it worked out against him because he made a basic chemistry mistake that he honestly should have caught. Yeah, I know he's not a scientist, but you don't have to be a scientist to remember the difference between those two things. Getting terminology correct is a part of his job. It's not likely anyone caught a felony charge solely because he said that one thing wrong. A guy I used to work with was going through a messy divorce, about 20 years ago now. His soon-to-be ex-wife was a psycho, and her father was a psychologist, so he was pulling all of the strings. Even had my coworker arrested at work one day. Bullcrap charges. The divorce case took years, one young son involved, and at every turn my friend lost because of something the father filed for or another string he pulled. In the end, they were in court and it was very apparent that my friend was going to lose custody and all visitation rights. Every plea he entered was squashed and he was mentally broken. The judge asked the ex-wife if she had anything else to add, and she said she had a written statement that she wanted the judge to read. The bailiff took the paper from her and handed it to the judge, who unfolded the note and read it. He stopped for a minute and asked her if she was certain she wanted this note added to the case, and she said yes. The judge turned to my friend and said, paraphrasing, "Mr. Insert name here, all these years and all these claims that I ruled out against you, the court profusely apologizes. I did not believe you, but now I do. Ruling in your favor." Bangs the gavel. "I grant you full legal and physical custody of your minor child. Bailiff, please handcuff Miss name here." My buddy was stunned that he won and happy at the same time. He later found out that the note said, "Give me my son, or I'll frickin' kill you." There you go, folks. Threaten the judge. That can only go well for you. You heard it here first. Not a lawyer, I know, but my parents were in a lawsuit where this happened. They owned a business, and on either side of it were other businesses. Their neighbors to the left sued us, claiming that they had been using their property without paying them or without permission, that we were essentially trying to adverse possess it. We got a surveyor to come in, and the surveyor said that not only were we using all of our property, but we had been paying rent to them on about 20 feet that was also our property. Obviously, they weren't happy, so they got their own surveyor, who gave us 50 feet. We won the lawsuit. Now, their little patch of property has a rusty fence all around it with keep out signs everywhere. It's about 20 by 10 feet. When I first started, my firm had me on a case where the client had claimed he lost because of ineffective assistance of counsel, basically saying that the old lawyer didn't do his job. So we prepare an argument based on not asking the right questions, not communicating, etc. We think it's going to be a tough case, but not unwinnable. Then we get the response to our complaint where the old lawyer argues that he was only ineffective because he didn't have time to prepare his case and only reviewed it the morning of the original trial. He had known about the case for months, by the way. The judge saw this, and during the trial, we had essentially asked, "Isn't this the definition of ineffective counsel? Not giving enough time to your client?" The silence from his side of the court was amazing. Needless to say, the trial didn't last much longer. "Thanks, opposing counsel. I guess you were ineffective for both of you." Not a lawyer, but in a suit against an employee, her attorney presented our contract and their contract to demonstrate the differences to prove that his client hadn't stolen ours. Where did you get our contract? Idiots. We won. Spent a couple of $100,000, defendants both ordered to pay $10K, filed bankruptcy and dissolved business, started anew with another competitor. Life. Not my case, but I was in courtroom watching a trial. Self-representing defendant who was accused of flashing a guard and pleasuring himself till, well, you know. As a pro se defendant, he defended himself at trial without an attorney. Prosecutor was doing well proving the case. When the female deputy was on the stand, the defendant asked her one question. "If you saw me do what you claim I did, then how big is my member?" The deputy responded by raising her hands and estimating about 15 inches. The guy grinned, turned to the jury and said, "Yeah, that's right," and sat down. Obviously, he was convicted. He was doing a 10-year prison sentence, so this conviction wasn't of much consequence, but I'll never forget it. Oh, I've got one. I was about 5 when this happened, but my parents explained it years later. There were a series of trees on the sidewalk in front of each house on the street. Although they were not part of our yard, the tree was owned by my parents and they were responsible for it. Some guy tripped over a branch and was seriously injured. He came after my parents for all of the money. The dude showed up with a mountain of evidence. Hospital bills, psychologists' testimonials, a photo montage of his slow and painful recovery, etc. Apparently, his lawyer brandished this stuff like a bat before court. My parents' lawyer thought he had a good case, until the first day of court when he walked over with a picture and asked, "Is this your tree?" My parents looked at the photo in disbelief. No, that is actually not our tree. The opposing counsel repeated the question. It went back and forth a few times until my parents' lawyer incredulously produced a picture of their tree, which was, even to the untrained eye, a completely different tree. At that point, the opposing counsel whirled around and started screaming at his client, "You said that was their tree!" Case summarily dismissed. My parents walked out in shock, came home, and bought me ice cream. All's well that ends well. What is the most embarrassing way your body has betrayed you? I danced classical ballet for years when I was younger. One day when I was 12, we were doing a stretch where we were lying on our backs with our butts scooted to the wall and our legs stretched towards the ceiling. We would let our legs fall into the splits, letting gravity assist us. So we were lying there, listening to quiet piano music, my legs wide open, and the girl next to me was whispering jokes and making me giggle. I could feel the onslaught of explosive gas happening, but being young and stupid, I was afraid to close my legs because I thought I'd get into trouble. So I ripped the loudest, most terrifying toot to ever exist. I think I blew a hole in my little pink leotard, I swear to God. The room was a huge wooden studio, so that expulsion from hell was bouncing off the walls for like 15 minutes. All the little girls started screaming, I was screaming, the teacher was probably screaming, still gives me nightmares. I stood up from sitting at work and screamed in pain because I got a cramp behind my nuts. I don't know how to explain it, but that's where I felt the pain. My co-workers were dying of laughter when I explained what my scream was. In 6th grade, I got hard for no reason and then was asked to go hand something to the teacher. When I stood up, this girl that sat near me stared right at my nethers with wide eyes. I'm just thankful she didn't tell anyone or I might not have heard the end of it. Last summer, I tripped over something while walking on the sidewalk. Happens every now and then, no big deal. It normally just looks like a funny skip or something, except this time I kind of leaped forward into the air. And somehow the normal response message to put my hands before me didn't reach its destination, so I just dropped onto the ground like a human sack of potatoes. It was equally painful and embarrassing. Still don't know how the crap that happened. I was sitting on the floor in my cheap wooden condo and let out a huge guff of wind. Dog in the condo below me started barking, and I could hear the cute girl who lived there and her visiting parents laughing. A note from the narrator, this video has been a matter of spreading out the toot stories which, surprise, comprise the majority of accounts from this forum. Struggle on, my fellow gaseous humans. One time I was really sick. So I went to throw up in the toilet, and as I started throwing up, I simultaneously started pooping myself as well. Once you start throwing up, you can't exactly stop until you're done. So I just kept throwing up while crapping myself for the smelliest, most uncomfortable 5 minutes or so of my life. Ever since I stopped being able to throw up like a normal person, I'm always scared I'll crap myself, so I sit on the toilet bending over a bucket, even though it's harder to throw up that way. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this trip down memory lane as much as I did. When I was in high school, by starting a period without any of the usual symptoms and leaving a bloody puddle on the chair and huge stains on my jeans. This happened to me, and a boy I had a crush on told me about it because I didn't realize. He asked me to go to the bathroom, he went to the admin office, got me a pair of track pants we used for PE, brought it to the bathroom, and got them to clean up the chair. Never told anyone that I know of. I was way too scared and embarrassed to ask him out or ever really talk to him again. In a meeting with my managers, they're complaining about X, Y, and Z that I haven't achieved. I'm not upset about the criticisms. If anything, I'm angry I have to hear them. But for some bizarre reason, my eyes started watering. We'd have these meetings weekly, and every time my eyes would water and tears would pour. It started just happening when I wasn't even angry. And even in normal angry situations, I'd never tear up. Just in those meetings. When I was 12, my best friend and I were hanging out in front of my apartment complex on the front step with two guys that we were super interested in. I was sitting on the top step with my bestie, and the two guys were goofing off farther down the steps and making us laugh. Well, I started laughing. So hard, in fact, that during one of those laughs where you're laughing so hard you're no longer making any noise, where you've basically lost control of it and can't stop, I started tooting really loudly. Even though I was mortified, I could not stop laughing and laughed harder, and then I started peeing my pants. I couldn't stop. The pee was running down the steps as I tried desperately to stop laughing by covering my ears and shutting my eyes. I finally gained control of my body and stopped laughing, but it was too late. My crush came over to sit next to me, and right before he sat down next to me, he saw the puddle of pee and jumped up in alarm and said, "Whoa!" I got up and tried to run inside, but I didn't have my key, so I had to ring the buzzer and had to wait for my mum to buzz me in front of them, with pee-soaked pants and the giant puddle of my pee that had run down half the steps. I stayed inside the rest of the day, and that night, my crush miraculously came back and asked me out through my bedroom window. Good God. How good was the joke that you experienced such a total loss of control? How did the trauma of your bodily evacuations not sober you up and stop you laughing? At least it seems to have humanized you enough for your crush to get brave enough to ask you out, so that's something. 2-hour train ride. I felt the air coming slowly, but I held it back until the end. Finally, the next stop was mine, so I stood up and walked to the door, still holding back that, now massive, amount of air in my colon. Just when the doors were about to open, some child stumbled into me from behind. It surprised me so much that I, just for a moment, didn't hold in. The result was the loudest, most disgusting butt blast you could ever imagine. I never left the train station faster in my entire life. Storytime. My grandmother was killed when she received the AIDS virus through a blood transfusion back in the day. Know that my grandma was the one that ate the bullet that makes hospitals screen blood. My family donates blood on her birthday. I hate donating blood. I hate needles, I hate seeing blood, and I hate the weird cold feeling you get through your entire arm. In a terrible twist of fate, I happen to have universal blood that is CMV negative. I can donate to babies and small children, which is apparently rare. Hospitals are always in short supply, it seems, as I am always getting calls to donate a double amount every time I'm eligible. I charge them twice as many cookies as they give to other people. One time, after giving a double dose, I was feeling just fine. I usually feel wiped out and need to go to sleep, but that day I was feeling fine. I got home and the wife was there, and we're trying to have a kid and we were both kind of flirty, so we went for it. I got in the buff when my knees wobbled, the room spun, and I just collapsed on the floor. I never lost consciousness, I was just sprawled naked on the floor, unable to lift my arms or legs. I could loll my head about. Don't try to have a romantic time after donating a double dose of blood. My husband was annoying me the other day, and I tried to toot on him, and I crapped myself. Not sure if it's just me, but if a girl is going to sit in my lap, I will get immediately hard. I don't go around trying to get girls to do this, but I have had a few insist and then call me out for being a pervert when I tried my best to persuade otherwise.
Santa? Looks like you should change your name to Meat Uprising.
When I inadvertently spit on the monitor when I'm trying to explain something to someone. Dislocated hip while having adult fun times. Twice! I once went to school when I felt really sick. Within 10 minutes of me being at my school, my stomach started cramping, and I informed the teacher I was going home. It's about a 10-minute drive with my bike. Every time I went over the littlest bump, my stomach started hurting really bad. Not even 2 minutes of me biking to my house, I stopped to throw up. I threw up so bad that I started crapping my pants. A lot. Some of my friends started driving by, but I don't think they noticed me. I call my dad, who didn't have any way of bringing me home. He did, however, have a scooter. He comes along and I tell him I need to go home, but not on the bike. He tells me there's no other way, so I get on the bike, with crap still in my pants, and we drive home together. Not being able to burp or toot when I want to, but becoming a grandmaster butt trumpeter when most inappropriate. Was hanging with my boyfriend at his parents' house and was in his room, and we were just being silly, and in a moment of silence, I tooted for the first time in front of him, super loud, and at that same moment his mum walked in and silently turned around and left. He starts laughing at my super shocked face and the situation, and then I let out another slow, drawn-out, loud toot. It was hilarious, but oh my gosh, it was embarrassing at the time. It only happened like maybe 6 weeks ago. Just look at my fricking username. Thank you for your contribution, dear username, I only have one hand. Honestly, entirely my own fault, but I drank too much one night and had a 3-hour train ride the next morning while completely hungover and nauseous. While in the train, I felt the need to throw up coming again, so I stood up to move to the toilet on board. This new modern fancy train had automatic doors on the toilet, and I couldn't figure out where the button was to close them, so I'm frantically trying to figure it out while suppressing my vomiting as much as possible. This sweet old lady who was sitting near the toilets noticed my trouble and pointed out the button to me, so I thanked her and closed the door and went. Very audibly. I didn't dare to look her in the eye when I walked by in shame. Brain. Let's have a seizure. Bladder.
Awesome! This is as good a time as any to pee yourself in front of everyone.
I am 30 years old. Last year, I pooped my pants. Full on. It was traumatic, shameful, and embarrassing. Be skeptical about any sounds your guts are making, people. My girlfriend and I went out one night to our local bar that does a wing night every week. It's our favorite bar, but also one of the only bars open all winter in our beach town, and wing night being the most popular night, we had to wait for a table for a while. Usually, we get one beer each during weeknights, but that night we had a lot more while waiting for a table. So after quite a few beers, some hot wings, and a night of all settling, the next day it needed out. I was at work, just me, my boss, and the head of all the offices in my state, 5 offices. I took one of the biggest dumps of my life and clogged the toilet the worst I ever have. 20 minutes with the plunger, I had to admit defeat. I told my boss, which was embarrassing as hell because she's pretty attractive. She called some plumbers, but none of them could come out that day, so I went back for another 15 minutes trying to get it to flush. I called it again, and the 3 of us left early since we only have one toilet in the office. The plumber came the next morning and got it cleared. So long story short, I ate too many wings, drank too much beer, and cost the company $150 the next day to unclog a toilet. In the womb, my lungs said, "Screw you," and have yet to cooperate 2 decades later. It's really cute when I can bench press 60 pounds, I'm a petite female, but I need a break after 2 flights of stairs. At a movie night with some friends and girls in high school, I somehow coughed and sneezed at the same time, and a huge snot rocket flew out of my mouth and onto the blanket. Very rarely I am walking and either one of my legs will just give out for like half a second. It's never enough to fall or anything, but it does make me look like I don't know how to walk or that I may be drunk. When trying on an engagement ring in a jewelry store, my finger swelled so much that I couldn't get it off. Even with lube applied by the store, it wouldn't go down. The ring just seemed bonded to my finger. I still remember feeling embarrassed when the jeweler smiled and said, "It's a good sign. This engagement ring is already married to your finger." The ring was eventually removed by soaking my finger in ice water several times to reduce the swelling. I have irritable bowel syndrome and get really insanely distended stomach full of gas when I eat certain foods. It looks like there's a basketball under my skin and it's all gas. My boyfriend of a year or so knew about my IBS, but hadn't really experienced the worst of it. One day we were hanging out at my apartment and I had my big gas belly. He knew what that meant, so I excused myself to my room to try and toot some of it out. He decides to come in to show me something on his phone as I'm laying on my bed with my knees up, trying to coax the gas out. He starts laughing at the sight. I start laughing. I feel an epic release of gas coming and I try to tell him to leave ASAP, but I'm also laughing. Between the laughter and the position I was in, I couldn't hold it back. I let out the loudest, longest toot in history. At first he laughed in surprise, then as it kept going on and on, his face changed from laughter to surprise to shock, mixed with what looked like a twinge of sadness. Watching him go through so many emotions right on his face just made me laugh harder, so the toot just kept going. After what feels like an eternity, he steps out of the room, hands over his mouth. He comes back in, and the butt blast is finishing off with a final toot toot toot. He is speechless. The first thing he says is, "I feel like I lived 80 years, died, and then came back to life again before that toot ended. I just don't understand how it was so long and steady, and then it got all Louis Armstrong at the end." And that's how he started calling certain trumpety toots Louis. Also, we moved in together a few months later, so my butt performance didn't deter him too much. Well, ladies and gents, I told you there were going to be a lot of stories on bowel movements, but believe me when I say I have actually reduced their representation in this video compared to the original forum post. Was on holiday in Fiji a few years back with the missus. We were playing rugby with some younger kids down the beach, and I wasn't feeling the freshest from a few to too many tequilas the night before. Wearing nothing but sports shorts, I got past the ball, partially crapped myself/sharted, and then hit legs, like it was a race between me getting back to the room before it made its way completely down the back of my legs. Grabbed the room key from the chair our things were on, dropped the shorts, and ditched them midway up to the room, up the stairs and down the straight for what felt like a effing lifetime. One trying to secure my privates, while the other held the room key for dear life. All while politely saying "Bula" as I ran past everyone, somewhat covered in my own poop. Had a killer metabolism until 27. After that, I grew a belly even though my diet didn't change. I actually ate pretty healthy, and didn't drink alcohol, sober for 8 years, and exercised pretty regularly. I can blame my dad's genes for that, even though my mum's side of the family is as skinny as a rail. I was standing in the checkout line at Target getting myself a drink and a little snack because I hadn't eaten anything yet that day, and started feeling kinda crappy because of it. I got in the shortest line, and then my mum and daughter started talking to the cashier about how something should have been on sale. My hearing starts getting staticky, and my vision is getting dark, and I'm bracing myself on the conveyor belt, just trying to breathe and play it cool. Mum and the cashier keep talking about the coupon, and I'm thinking to myself, dear God, how embarrassing. If they have to call an ambulance and I'm taken out of this place on a stretcher, I can never come to this Target again. So they keep talking, and I just decide to sit down on the floor because that's just what you do. And I'm sitting there with my head on my knees when this manager walks up and in a kind of angry, confused tone, asks me if I was okay, and I stand up and tell her, oh, yeah, I'm fine, and play it off to avoid drawing any further attention from myself. I check out, take my stuff, and sit in my car in a cold sweat, and realize I had never fainted before in my life, and that I can never go to that Target again. On the bus, two hot girls in front of me, I fell asleep and woke myself up with a really loud moan that sounded like, didn't get laid. I didn't know what healthy eating was and ate as much as I could when I was a teenager. Now I have huge stretch marks for life. I can't go shirtless without feeling embarrassed. Dude, nobody on the planet, male or female, thinks stretch marks are horrible or unattractive. I speak for all of us when I say most of us don't notice, and the ones who do notice don't care at all. Getting whiskey wee-wee when hooking up with a smoking hot girl I knew. Had testicular torsion in the middle of performing a one-act play. Worst night ever. I coughed at work, which made my butt constrict, which tore open a hemorrhoid, which proceeded to soak blood through my pants. Had to leave work early that day. Friends, exploded butt isn't fun. Every time I get nervous or am in a bad and serious situation, I smile. Was working out at the gym a couple of years ago and decided to go do wind sprints on the basketball court. The basketball court is actually 4 courts lined up side by side with a walking and running track on the second floor looking down on it. This particular morning, the track was busy. After doing a couple of sprints, I noticed a basketball lying about 1/4 of the way down the court. So I, being all cool and stuff, started another sprint and bent down to grab the ball so I could scoop it up, dribble, and do a layup on the way down the court. My middle-aged, dumb self sprinted down the court, bent down and grabbed the ball, but was unable to correct to a standing position, so my momentum carried me to the ground where I slid on my stomach for what seemed like an eternity in front of all these people on the track above. To my credit, I got up and finished the layup. Middle age ain't fun, kids. Being pregnant and peeing myself a little every time I sneeze. First time hooking up with this guy I'd been lusting after for a while. No clue he was into it too, so double yay. Some, or all of, the drinks were had, and as a result my body completely refused to cooperate. No matter how into it I was in my head, or all he did to get me going, which was a lot and felt awesome, my lady flower stayed drier than the Sahara Desert. Late in my pregnancy, my body began producing a lot of relaxin, so my hips would constantly fall out of place. If I sat crisscross applesauce too long or sat with my hips below my knees for too long, I couldn't get up or walk for several minutes without help. So imagine my fury when I'm sitting on the couch eating some ice cream and my husband rips the foulest butt gas known to man and I can't effing escape. By growing a lump in my right testicle. Now I've had 3 strangers, read doctors, touch my nuts in the past 5 days, and I can still smell the lube from the ultrasound. Surgery is scheduled in 2 days to get the testicle removed. It's not ideal, but it's better than the alternative. I have to say the most embarrassing part is bringing it up to family, friends, and co-workers to keep them in the loop. I assure you no one wants to talk about your balls, especially removing one. My own father clams up and hasn't reacted at all like I thought he would. I go back and forth between being incredibly transparent and then shy or ashamed. Touch your bits, everyone. It could save your life. I believe either grade 4 or 5 it was my turn to present my space poster I made up. After a minute of talking about what I've done and learned, I unleash an ungodly sneeze. Wasn't a little boy, "Achoo!" This bad boy was something a grown dad would do. This sneeze has me standing in front of my class with 2 massive streaks of snot dangling out each nostril hanging by my chin. I'm very prone to nosebleeds that range from paper cut amounts of blood to full-blown severed artery amount. Typically, they come along randomly during the early parts of November when heating units are turned on and the air is especially dry. Anywho, I wait tables for a living at a fancy restaurant, so this can be an especially problematic few weeks as they can pop up randomly while chatting with a table. One night, I had a couple in from out of town who declined drinks because they were so hungover from the night before. I mentioned that I was also having a rough day from the previous night, and we shared an empathetic laugh with each other. My nose then started to bleed rather badly, resulting in the table thinking their server was a heavy user of white powder. What's the most "what the F" moment with your siblings? When I was younger, I was playing outside when I heard my little brother giggling like a maniac around the other side of the house in the backyard. I went to see what was going on, and he was gleefully peeing into my dog's open mouth as the dog was lapping it up while dangerously close to his doodle. As a bonus story, I'll tell you about the time my brother almost caught me smoking when I was in high school. There is a barn across from a small pond by my house, and one winter my friend Murph and I were sparking up in the upper floor. We hear the dogs get let outside and someone mumbling, and we peek out the window so that we can keep tabs on whoever was outside now. My little brother is walking toward the frozen pond with a pickaxe and then begins to break apart the ice. After he's chopped it up a bit, he crouches down like a goddamn monkey, takes a chunk of pond ice and begins eating it while looking back and forth to make sure nothing sneaked up on him while he ate. It was like watching the gosh darn Nature Channel. In fact, okay, let's talk about my stepbrother for a second. Not many stories I can make into something of length, so I'll just do snippets. He brought a blank Uzi over to my house and asked me if he could fire it out the room of my window. I told him, no, it's going to sound like you're firing a fricking gun, and he did it anyway, and then he came back later saying, I told him we were popping balloons, with a smug smile on his face. He once offered me $100 to blow up a weather balloon in my room until it popped. I declined. In the dead of winter, he propped a ladder against my roof and then army crawled up the icy shingles with 2 butter knives as climbing tools, and then began pounding on my window to let him in cause it's cold outside. He bought one of those hoverboards, lit 2 smoke bombs and rode it while spinning in circles as I filmed him until he started coughing so bad he couldn't keep going. He regularly buys designer clothes like polo shirts and Nike shoes and the like. These clothes usually look stupid as hell, like the white polo he brought with a giant tree with a sun behind it. Often giving them to me after a week cause, nah man, I don't want these, what was I thinking? One time he asked me to drive him to Plato's Closet to sell off 2 duffel bags full of stuff like this. I'll never forget his gangster swagger walking back to my car and him proudly announcing, man, I got $20. He once was trying to convince me to help him put a trampoline on the roof so he could use it to jump off said roof into the pond nearby. Took a lot of convincing to explain that he wouldn't make a jump that far. Afterwards, he wanted to have the trampoline on the ground instead. Then I had to explain how the best case scenario he simply misses and hurts himself, but more likely he'd go right through it and break his legs. The roof is on the 2nd story of the house, on that side of the yard. I think a few of us can sympathize with having a younger sibling that we were about 50% sure would grow up to become some sort of mass murderer or in an asylum later in life. This is just a particularly striking example. My sister used to sleepwalk into my room and just stare at me with a soulless murder glare. It was scary. This one time I was asleep and my little bro walked in and just got into bed with me. I was like, bro, what are you doing? This isn't your bed. To which he responds, I think I know what I'm doing, and fell asleep instantly. I said, F it, and went to sleep in his bed. I was winning a watermelon eating contest. My sister, realizing she could never beat me, picked up her half-eaten watermelon and bashed me in the back of the head with it, knocking me out cold. Did she actually use your loss of consciousness to catch up and eat more watermelon than you? Because if not, technically, you still won because you were leading prohibitively at the suspension of play caused by the injury. I haven't reviewed the most recent update on the official international watermelon eating competition rules, but I will put this in my pocket and start calling it a win. I've shared this before, but it seems applicable here. One time I walked past the bathroom to get to my room. My brother had left the door open and was standing on the toilet seat, waiting for me to pass. As he sees me, he exclaims, "This is how a man takes a dump," makes a loud noise and drops a thick log right in front of my eyes. I had just finished riding my bike home from a friend's place to see my mum pull into the driveway. Out of the other side of the car, my sister's head popped out. She had been off to college and I didn't expect to see her. My first thought, which I openly said because I was a little crap, was, "Why's sis home? She get knocked up in college?" Out steps my very pregnant sister. It was a rare double what the frick moment, as I was surprised to see her that fricking pregnant, and both my sister and mum were shocked at my accurate joke guess. And inappropriate guess, to be fair.
Sort of similar thing happened to me. I texted my cousin on her 20th birthday, "Congratulations, you avoided teenage pregnancy." Turns out she had just found out she had gotten knocked up and hadn't told anybody yet. Studies have shown that incidents of teenage pregnancy drop off significantly after age 20. My brother, directly after the funeral, stole our uncle's war medals from his bedroom. His wife found out, told me and my mother, and then my mother made me sneak them back in. I like that this is as much of a mother story as it is a sibling story. Good stealthy evasion of the family shame, Mum. My girlfriend's brother called. They never talk, it's a distant and strained relationship, and she looks at me like, why the F is he calling? I joked, he's calling to tell you he's getting married. She tells me to shut up. A few minutes later, she comes back, he's getting married. I joked again, I guess he knocked this girl up. She says no. A few days later, the pregnancy announcement is up on Facebook. Sometimes jokes hit too close to home. Now we've got to sit through an awkward wedding pretending everybody else is happy about this. They're not. To clarify, the couple to be married is happy about it, or so he insists. Nobody else is happy, though. Everybody feels like this is a huge mistake, especially considering this girl has gone out of her way to meet his mother once, living in the same town, and they both live with their parents still, and have known each other less than a year, and been dating less than that. Maybe we're all just cynical buttholes, and these two have the key to… Who am I kidding? I give it 6 years. I was out on a car ride with my dad and we arrived back at the house at like 3 a.m. My front door opens straight into my kitchen and I throw open the door expecting an empty kitchen only to see my brother butt naked standing in front of the sink. I screamed, "Why the F are you naked?" He scrambled back to the shower. Apparently he was mid-shower, his back hurt, so he went to the kitchen to start heating water for a hot water bottle for his back, and just stopped to have a snack or something while waiting for the water to boil, all while leaving the shower running. My dad still laughs about it. And yes, 3 a.m. My family keep odd hours, especially back when we were at school and it was summer break. My sister logged into my RuneScape account and finished the Dragon Slayer quest that 10-year-old me with limited playtime had spent months to gear up for. I was devastated. I was sitting in front of the television one day when my sister walked up behind me. She threw a little bouncy ball at me, but it bounced off my head, hit the television, bounced back off my head, and back at her. She was so surprised that it was such a perfect shot that she decided to try again to repeat it. I was so happy that my sister was playing with me that I sit there as she throws this ball at my head trying to repeat the shot for like half an hour. Once I was taking a leak and my brother barges in, starts peeing and yells, "2 players!" My family decided to spend Christmas in Mexico at an all-inclusive resort after I had moved across the country for work. My siblings and I were sharing a room. One night, my brother gets in late from drinking. I wake up and see him standing over my luggage. I say, "What the frick are you doing?" He says, "Taking a frickin' leak." He was. I was furious. He never really did apologize. My sister cut my hangy-down thingy that connects my upper lip with my gums with a pair of scissors while I was asleep. The internet tells me this is called a frenulum. We were not the best of friends growing up. One comment reads, I knew I'd find a logical response here somewhere. Watching TV with my older sister. She gets up, walks over to the house phone, and picks it up. "Hello?" she said. "Yes, he is. One moment." She covers the microphone. "It's for you, insert name here." Crazy. I didn't hear it ring, I think to myself. I walk to the phone. My sister begins savagely beating me with the corded phone. For no reason. She concocted a ruse just to beat me with the phone. Interesting. Is she single? When I was 16, I went with my family to visit my grandfather at the old folks' home. Well, I ended up striking up a conversation with another guy there who had an Irish accent. After a few minutes, my then 7-year-old brother asks this guy, "Why are you talking Mexican?" He just laughed, but I was so embarrassed that I didn't know how to react. When I was about 4, my parents told my brother, aged 13, to take my sister and I for a walk for an hour. I think my parents wanted some private time. He took us for a walk, all right. We were gone for 12 hours. My parents were frantic and the police were looking for us. God knows what he was thinking, but he's always been a bit of an idiot. My sister discovered her inner thinking voice when she was about 4. She came downstairs into the kitchen, totally distraught, and said, "Who is talking to me all the time? Everywhere I go, someone talks to me about the things I do, but I can't see anybody." We're all taking it for granted here that the sister in question has an inner monologue and isn't in fact crazy or hearing ghosts. Came downstairs from being asleep. Living room in disarray. Blood drops are on the floor, and I see little flecks here and there on the wall. I said to my girlfriend, "What the frick happened?" Concerned someone got injured or something. "Your brothers had a scissor fight," she tells me. A scissor fight. Yes, those two fricking brain surgeons took up craft scissors and went at each other in my living room, while my no doubt horrified girlfriend watched in shock and awe. They were gone by the time I woke up, thank God, but the evidence was hard to miss. I was this close to beating M. Bison in Street Fighter 2, and my big brother pulled the plug because he wanted me out of the room to smoke herb with his buddies. A case of justifiable fratricide if I ever did hear one. What an idiot. That's setting you up perfectly to rat him out to your parents. Well, strangely, and by an odd coincidence, he was found out the very next day. Told my sister to come inside for dinner. She was hitting balls down our driveway with a field hockey stick. She immediately turned and swung full force into my face, breaking my nose and deviating my septum. That was 20 years ago, and she won't talk to me because I've wronged her in the past. B-word, I can't breathe out my right nostril. My brother and I used to share a room when we were kids. One day I woke up and saw my brother standing in the middle of the room trying to mount a toy gun on his member. Hey, sometimes you need protection. Probably when I was 9 and my older brother was 13. We were home watching TV one day during the summer. He was flipping through channels and stopped on an episode of Donahue that featured a male stripper right in the middle of his routine, with an audience of middle-aged women cheering. He put the remote down and excitedly said, "Oh, we're watching this." He's now married with 2 kids and is aspiring to be a Baptist minister. I tell this story anytime I get a chance to embarrass my brother. I was about 9, making him about 6. Thanksgiving dinner at our grandparents' house. We were both in the kitchen together, just the 2 of us, each with a slice of pumpkin pie. My little brother grabs the salt shaker from the table, slowly unscrews the cap, dumps the entire shaker of salt on his pie, and eats the whole thing, making eye contact with me the whole time. He had this look like he knew what he was doing, so I didn't question it. 20 minutes later, he's chasing a cousin through the hall. He dead stops, says, "Uh-oh," and projectile vomits all over the walls and floor. He is descended upon by adults asking him what the matter is. His response? Too much salt. I was the only one who knew what he meant. It was pretty awkward when he knocked on my bedroom door to give me condoms when my boyfriend was over, but also very nice of him to be worried about me like that. The "what the F" moment comes from his girlfriend later that day, sharing with me, "I know you probably don't want to know this, but your brother's eggplant is huge." I super did not want to know that. F you, Shannon. My poor brother shares your pain. He had a party at our place when I was 18, and me and my then boyfriend were there, and then boyfriend gets really drunk, walks up to my brother and says, "Hey, I'm probably gonna sleep with your sister tonight." Spoiler, he then went upstairs and passed out in bed, alone. My brother still makes fun of me and cringes at that to this day. When I was young, about 13, my family was leaving my grandparents' house after a weekend visit. It was a long drive home, about 4 hours. I had to pee really bad and my parents hated stopping. So I discreetly grabbed my empty Mountain Dew bottle and emptied my bladder into it. It wasn't hard to hide being in the back seat of an SUV. Well, I put it under the seat after I was finished, and when I got home, I totally forgot about it. My parents cleaned out the car later, and my thought was they threw it away. Nope, they had placed it in the fridge thinking it was a half-full bottle of pop. Well, I only figured this out because my sister took a drink out of it and screamed. She said it must have been old and been in there forever because it tasted horrible. I was horrified, but I took it from her, fake smelled it, and threw it away, saying, "Yeah, that's disgusting." I have never told her, or anyone for that matter, what really happened. My little sister looked at me dead-eyed once and told me, "You have demons in you. You need to get them out," or something along those lines. I asked her what the frick she was talking about, and she just kind of went back to doing her thing. The girl was like 8, so I don't think she was trying to troll me. Overwrote my save file to start a new game. You son of a working woman, I will never forgive you. My little brother did the bottle glitch over my megaton hammer in Zelda Ocarina of Time. Replaced the hammer with a bottle. When I couldn't get past a certain section of the game due to having no hammer, I confronted him and asked why my hammer was a bottle. He swore he didn't know why, but I knew. I always knew. 20 years later, he brings it up and says that he did it on purpose because he was mad at me. Little siblings destroying your save games feels like a very 90s and early 2000s kids phenomenon. Perhaps someone can enlighten me if it's still very much a thing today? Seems less likely now we're out of the world of memory cards and most gaming systems have user profiles. So let me know in the comments. My favorite story is that I once went outside at 1 a.m. to watch a meteor shower and my brother's bedroom window faced the backyard. I don't know why he was up, he was maybe 12 at the time, and I hear him open the window and shout, "Who's out there?" I reply, "Just me," and he says, "Oh, I'll be right out." My brother gets out of bed at 1 in the morning, puts on some shoes and comes outside and says, "So, what are we doing?" The kid was forever down for late night adventures, apparently. I'm surprised that this resonated with so many people. This is my favorite story about my brother. He's a great kid now, 21, and I'm always proud of him and his adventurous spirit. My sister spoiled Dumbledore's death for me. She read The Half-Blood Prince in 24 hours, asked me if I wanted to know what happened. I said no, she told me anyway. I'm still mad. F you, Laura. My sister complaining bitterly about, "Why do you get a new car in your own apartment?" The answer was, "Because I work for a living," which apparently was a deeply offensive thing to say. Go figure. How old were the two of you at the time? Well, that's the sad part. I was 32 and she was 30. One of my sisters and I shared a room. One day she showed me her jewelry box, which was full of her petrified toilet paper wrapped poops. She then proceeded to show me how to do it, by laying toilet paper across the toilet seat, and then said I could save my poops too. Yeah, I took a pass on that one. My brother severely hurt his right leg in a work accident. His doctors tried to save his leg, but ultimately he ended up getting it amputated. So before he had it amputated, he got around on crutches, or on a day where he was in pain, a wheelchair. During this time, I moved back home to help him get around and do things he couldn't do. One thing he loves doing is building computers and video games. I would take him to electronic shops and follow him around as he bought games and stuff for his computer. We would go shopping like this more than once a week. I never minded because he's family and we get along really well. We got to know a lot of the staff at these shops. One time I was looking for some DVDs on my own, and one of the guys we'd gotten to know comes up and asks me if I needed help. And then he says, "You are a pretty cool girlfriend. You never seem bored or annoyed that your boyfriend spends so much time with his computer." I was so shocked I didn't reply right away, but then I made a super disgusted face and said, "He's my brother." Cue super awkward moment which doubled when my brother came by to tell me we could go and called me Boo, which is a nickname I've had my whole life that my brother gave me. It was so embarrassing. My mum was recently divorced and had a friend with a daughter my age. Let's call him Mark. The daughter and I were both 14 and got a lot of time together, so obviously there was some mutual experimenting. Well, it got really weird about 2 years later when my mum and Mark announced they were getting married and I was going to have a new stepsister. I came home from college for Thanksgiving, and the very first thing my brother says to me is, "If you think about it, 'Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned' is just a fancy way of saying, 'Sorry, Daddy, I've been bad.'" Then, during Thanksgiving dinner, he looked down, patted his stomach, and softly said, "Hey babe, ready for round 2? 'Cause I sure am." Then he got up and got another helping of turkey and mashed potatoes. Not the most WTF, but one we still like to joke about. My grandmother generally sends us all cards at Christmas, but a few years ago we all got our cards in the mail and things didn't quite match up. My oldest sister and I got the usual cards with the sweet, heartfelt messages from our grandma. We still call her the $100 grandchild when we're headed to family gatherings. So, are we all agreed that the sister took the money from the other cards to up her amount? Siblings are devious, and all it takes is a bit of steam to get inside the envelope. My brother came home after his first week of college, snuck in the house while we were sleeping, unpacked and went to bed and woke up in the morning acting like he had never gone away to college. Refused to talk about it and acted like we were all crazy when we did. He was 10 years older than me, so I was only 8 at the time, but I remember my parents being very worried. He still won't admit or acknowledge that he ever went to college. Used to keep my green herb up in one of my ceiling tiles when I was a teen. Sister finds it, invites 15 friends over, and they cumulatively smoke an ounce of my stash. Get home to find my box with about a bowl left, and then I'm the one who gets in trouble for having Mary J in the house. American teachers abroad. What is the craziest thing your students thought was true about Americans? When I was teaching in Spain, I introduced myself to the class and told them I'm from Miami. I hear a kid shout out in Spanish, "Wow, how is this guy alive?" CSI Miami, Dexter, Miami Vice, and Florida Man have really corrupted foreigners' views of my city. I was presenting an exhibition in Shanghai of about 95% Chinese people, and a young woman came up and asked me where I was from. I am white with brown hair and eyes. When I said I was American, she looked baffled and responded, "But don't all Americans have blue eyes?" A lot of people also think that all Americans are fat and tall. It's a bit more understandable when the person is old. An old man in Shanghai Park asked where I was from, and when I said the US, he hollered, "Then how are you so short? I'm just over 5'2". American in South Korea here. Have been asked by co-workers if high schools really have vending machines full of birth control pills. Also, if I know any cowboys, not the football team, and if I have a gun back home. Students ask me if I know Obama. Same kids yell, "Obama!" anytime they see a black person in their books or in a video. We're working on that. At my high school, I was the immigrant mediator who would teach newly arrived Russian and Ukrainian immigrants, and sometimes Jamaican and Haitian immigrants, English, and assimilate them into American society. This was in southern Brooklyn, where there were thousands of Russian immigrants coming in during the early 2000s every year. I was picked for the Russians mostly because I was from Chechnya and knew Russian. The biggest thing they would ask is how did they start with dealing drugs, joining gangs, and where is the nearest gun store. They came from places with atrocious crime, and often they were criminals, and they probably heard about America's drug and gang problems and thought they could make a better living doing that in America. They had watched movies like The Godfather, or even stuff like Menace II Society, and thought America was this badass outlaw land, when in reality their countries were a ton worse. Many of them came during the 2000s during the early Putin era, when crime was dropping fast and it became harder to be a criminal in Russia. But many were shocked that NYC was not the crime-filled nation it was back in the 1980s and 1990s. Hi, welcome to Brooklyn. I'm Willmaster123. I'll be your immigrant mediator. Here's the steps to get your FID card and a list of local gun stores. Here's the common application to fill out for the Bloods, Crips, and all the other major gangs in the area. Here's the list of gangs who are hiring and positions they are trying to fill. As an immigrant myself, I would be wary of letting my handlers know that I intended to involve myself as a criminal in the country I was moving into. They asked me to explain what white trash meant, and then they got confused when I said that it didn't apply to black people. A friend of mine did a few years teaching in South Korea, and every new class he taught, there was always at least one kid who would ask him if he knew Leonardo DiCaprio. They were always so disappointed when he said no. When I was teaching English in Japan, I had a 15-year-old girl ask me if I saw everything in blue because my eyes are blue. I almost laughed, but she was dead serious, and everyone else looked at me expectantly while waiting for the answer. Not a specifically American stereotype, but similarly indicative of an insulated culture. Which actually reminds me, I also had an ethnically Japanese co-worker who had grown up in Las Vegas, but who also spoke Japanese. His students often refused to believe he was American. They thought it was some elaborate ruse. A guy I knew when I lived in Central America asked if there was time to get out of the way of the snow. Upon questioning, it turned out that he thought that snow fell all at once. Foomph! Like a big blanket. Had some family come up from Mexico to visit for Christmas. It snowed and they all ran out to play in it, then quickly ran back inside. They were shocked at how cold it was, like they didn't think they needed gloves and jackets to have a snowball fight. My cousin said, "We knew it would be cold, but we didn't think it would be that cold." I got a few surprised looks when I told students we didn't sleep with our shoes on. Taught in Spain for a bit, I was asked multiple times what kind of machine gun I owned. I swear, if anyone else stereotypes us Americans as gun-toting hicks, I'm gonna take my M16 to their city and see what they call us then. First question was where I'm from. Detroit. Subsequent questions asked in no certain order. Do you have black friends? Have you shot someone? Do you own a gun? Yes, no, no. I'm skeptical.
Real Americans are taken to Walmart at birth, where they are issued a firearm, a six-pack of Bud Light, and a Republican voter registration. Are you sure you're an American? An exchange student from Italy was disappointed when he came to Colorado and attacks by Native American tribes weren't a regular thing anymore. I was teaching elementary school in Seoul. The day's lesson was about asking people what they ate for various meals. Kimchi is eaten at every meal in Korea pretty much, and I asked one of the students if he gets tired of eating kimchi. He says, "It's okay. You don't get tired of eating hamburgers at every meal, right?" As a note, I am very thin. I'm trying to think of an actual equivalent for America, but I don't think anybody eats anything as frequently as Koreans eat kimchi. Other commenters sure have a lot of opinions on the matter, though 80% of them do appear to be either cheese, bread, or potatoes. My students seemed pretty shocked I didn't personally know Obama. Also, they call every black guy Obama and every black girl Beyoncé. Interesting that we now have multiple cases of this being a thing in foreign countries. First question asked was if I'd ever shot anybody, then asked if I owned a gun. Then they seemed skeptical that I was American at all. This is second-hand, but Mark Salzman's non-fiction book, partly about teaching in China in the 80s, Iron and Silk, had some doozies in it. A grown man asked him if the rumor he heard about America was true, that we had machines that did our work for us that looked like people, but occasionally went rogue and hurt people. I think someone heard about the Terminator and played telephone with it, is the only explanation I've got. Or perhaps Blade Runner. I teach in the Middle East, and one of my students was legitimately scared of gay people in America because he thought they were aggressive. Like they would pull you from a car and assault you aggressive. Just a lot of scary, weird misconceptions about gay people. When I was mentoring university students in Kyrgyzstan through the US Embassy Outreach Program, they thought The Bachelor was how we actually dated in the US. I taught high school English in France. Some sample questions from the students. How many donuts do you eat per week? How many celebrities have you met? They were under the impression that celebrities were just walking around all over the place and around every corner, in a country of 300 million. How many guns do you own? Do you really only drink from red cups at parties? Does everyone drive a big car, like a Hummer? How many times a day do you eat McDonald's? Why does everyone in America go to church? How many gangs are there in your city? The only cities in the US that actually mattered to them were New York, Las Vegas, and Miami. I worked in Korea for several years. Occasionally my work group would go out for pizza or steak dinners, or something like that. Several of them would admit to me that even after scarfing down an appetizer, a salad, a bowl of soup, a massive steak, 2 sides, and several glasses of beer, they would go home and have rice and kimchi, because they hadn't yet had a meal. Apparently, you are not a good Korean unless you have rice and kimchi at least 3 times a day. One of them would often bring me bread. Later, they would ask how the bread was. It started to seem like all our conversations revolved around bread. I asked one guy about this once. He said, "That's what foreigners always eat, right?" It seemed that they were inferring that since they had to eat rice and kimchi 3 times a day, there must be some American equivalent, and since Americans never eat rice, it must be bread. Minds were blown when I told them that I do sometimes eat rice at home, or potatoes, or bread, or pasta. I taught English in China for a while back when I was in high school. They thought all white guys could surf, shoot a gun, and walked around without a shirt. All white girls had huge chests and were very stupid. All black people were drug users. The European fascination with our use of red Solo cups as the sole way of imbibing never ceases to amuse me. I'm from Ireland, but I lived in Ohio for a year. I too found Solo cups and school buses an extreme novelty. I enjoyed the portion sizes too. I pay once and get 2 meals out of it. Mostly, the biggest thing I was taken back by was seeing American military vehicles and soldiers in person for the first time. I've traveled a lot and big into journalism, so I follow international relations and current affairs quite a bit. But it never dawned on me that I'd basically seen saturation coverage of American soldiers in films, video games, and on the news, Afghanistan, Iraq, but never in person. I kind of weirdly had a bit of a starstruck reaction when I saw soldiers at an airport or Humvees traveling between bases.
Besides being asked if Americans shower with their shoes on in order to keep them clean enough to wear in the house, I've had to keep a straight face when a barely 5-foot skinny Japanese girl asks me if she seriously had a chance to be a big black rapper's hoe upon graduation if she went to college in the US. Other noteworthy ones were an adult student whose mind was blown when I told her that we have sewing needles. She thought they were a Japanese-only thing, and a kindergarten teacher who didn't know that cats-cradled string games were known outside of Japan. Studied abroad in Japan, and people were surprised that my English was so fluent. I'm a white Australian. Many of us in English-speaking countries would also attest that when a certain amount of Aussie slang is involved, it nearly becomes another language. No shame on the Japanese for thinking this. I'm in a small town in northern Italy, and my students are baffled by the fact that I don't go to church. I taught English in France for a year. One day, one of the kids made a comment about seeing me out running over the weekend. The kid sitting next to him goes, "Well, how did you see her if she lives in America?" The teacher was like, "Wait, what?" Turns out this one kid thought I flew home to the US every day. This was a 4th grader. I'm an American in Europe who TAs, and most things are from movies. Super unsafe, callous people, everyone has a gun, women sleep with anything that moves, etc. When I ask, say, a German if I should then base my opinions on how they are shown in movies, I get a look of horror followed by one of understanding my point. Wait, you mean all Germans aren't lederhosen-wearing, beer-drinking yodelers? No, that's Bavaria. It's the Texas of Germany. Not a teacher, but I'm from Tornado Alley, and a group of students in New Zealand ask me, "How do you get to school? Aren't there just tornadoes everywhere? It must be so scary." Apparently they thought that there are tornadoes everywhere all the time, and you just drive on the road like, "Oh look, there's 3 tornadoes out today." Not just an American thing, but one of my teachers was in the Peace Corps back in the day and went to the Philippines. She said that all the kids thought that snow grew on trees because the only snow they'd ever seen was in pictures. Women sleep with anything that moves. This is an American stereotype? I thought we were looked on as prudes in Europe. Ethiopian children didn't believe I was American because I'm not blonde. Black people are made of chocolate. I almost didn't want to correct them. They prefer the term delicious Americans. Introducing myself to my middle schoolers in France. Where are you from? I'm American. But you are not fat? I was asked, why is most of the world America? Me. Huh? What do you mean? You know, North America, South America, Central America, Latin America, United States of America. He was from a very small place in South America, so he scrounged up a world map and talked about it for a few hours. A kid asked where my gun was and if my horse was outside. One of the takeaways from the other stories seems to be just how many people outside of America think that GTA is a depiction of everyday American life. It's just so nice to see someone base their image off Red Dead Redemption instead. I work in the Middle East, and I got a lot of casual N-word dropping, I think because the students hear it in gangster movies and pop culture, and think it's just commonplace. They have no idea that it's even slightly taboo. I tried to argue one day, and a student pointed out that Snoop Dogg said it about someone else, so why can't he? Says something about our culture, I guess. I am not a teacher, however my brother is over in Germany. He told me that he went to a skate park and got thirsty, so walked to the snack bar area to get a water. My brother, "Hey, could I get a water please?" Snack guy, hands him the water. No, here it's free. My brother, "I appreciate that, but I would like to pay." Snack guy, "No, it's free. See, I'm not a Nazi." My brother, "Oh no, I wasn't implying that you were." Long story short, apparently some German people think that they are all Nazis still. I taught a few English lessons in China while I was working there, and was surprised that only a few minutes into my first lesson, there was a widespread gasp when I began writing basic phrases on the board. Several hands shot up into the air immediately, and I quickly realized that everyone's question was how long it took me to train myself to write with my left hand. The average age in the class was probably 35, and all had thus come from a generation where they were forcibly taught to write with their right hands, even if they were natural lefties like myself. Not quite to the point of this thread, but it sure was interesting. My mother taught in Australia from 1979 to 1986. Her students found the way she pronounced things strange at times, but other than that, nothing weird. The students just accepted she was American like a lot of the people they saw on TV. She said the adults were worse. My mother is African American, so she had to deal with racists. My uncle called her a Negro until my father told him to stop. She also dealt with some guy on the street who called her a bloody Negro when he bumped her car with his car. My father was with her and instructed her on how to insult him, so she pokes her head out of the car and calls the guy an effing wog. Having an African American woman yell that at him caught him off guard, so he shut up and drove away. Also, a lot of the Australians my mother interacted with found her natural hair very, very interesting. I taught English in China for a summer. One of the Chinese teachers, a college graduate, told me that China is vastly more ethnically diverse than America because, in America, you only have white people and black people. I wasn't teaching, but while traveling I was asked by some school kids from London to confirm that it's illegal to talk in elevators in the States, especially New York City. From New York, can confirm. Not a teacher, but did do volunteer work in a lot of other countries. How I disappointed people in various parts of the world. I did not know Britney Spears, Chile. I could not take them with me to adopt, Brazil. I was not fat or stupid, Germany. I could speak Spanish, Spain and Chile. No, I am not super easy and will not have adult fun times with you, Iraq. I don't own any guns and do in fact know my way around international politics, Netherlands. I'm actually an atheist, also Netherlands. Canadian in Japan. When I worked at junior high school, one of my co-workers thought all North Americans just don't eat fish, or rice, ever, at all. He was shocked when I told him I ate fish and rice all the time as a kid. I'm pretty sure he thought it was just an Asian thing. My sister went on exchange in Germany for a semester last year. Someone asked her if all Californians surfed to school. My kids here in Korea were shocked when I told them I couldn't remember my blood type, because pretty much everyone here knows theirs, and it's supposedly related to personality traits. I told them that blood type isn't really that important to Americans, and they didn't seem to believe it. While teaching 4th graders how to tell time, they told me that they go to bed anywhere between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., and they definitely didn't believe me when I said that 4th graders in America go to bed earlier than that. To them, I guess kids everywhere are sleep-deprived. Also, a 3rd grader once asked me why I'm so dark. I'm mixed black and white. Not a teacher, but I had a friend in Germany while I took German. We exchanged papers and edited them for each other for our foreign language class. Apparently, her English teacher said that all American schools start at 9 in the morning. I lived in a rural area at the time where we started at 7:30. It took her a while to believe me. I taught in Mexico for a brief period of time. Here were a few of the odd misconceptions. My students couldn't believe that I grew up without a maid and that I had to work through high school and college. They thought that even the poorest people lived in nice houses and owned laptops, smartphones, nice cars, etc. They didn't seem to believe that food insecurity and extreme poverty existed in the US. Thanks to Hollywood's racist portrayal of black Americans, my students seemed to share the idea that most black Americans were gun-toting thugs. Some of them even said they would run the other way if they saw a black person walking down the street. None of them had ever seen or met a black person in their life. I did my best to convey that this was in no way true. Another weird thing was that my Mexican roommates would yell at me if I walked around our apartment barefoot. They told me that I would catch a cold by walking around without socks or shoes on. Apparently, my American friends were also told this by their host families and roommates. Been at my best friend's Mexican grandma's house quite a lot. Socks are required footwear at all times or else we'll die. I'm Russian. We'll get cold if I walk around without socks. We'll get cold feet with socks. I'm in Japan. Had an educated, middle-aged guy tell me he thought it was strange that we traditionally used pumpkins during Halloween. I asked him why he thought that. He goes, "It must be very expensive." I'm like, why? Because it must be expensive importing all those pumpkins from Japan. Dude thought all the world's pumpkins came from Japan. When I tried to convince him otherwise, he didn't believe me, until I asked him where he got his pumpkins. When he told me he got his from Yamanaka grocery store, I was like, we pick ours from the ground. He was still skeptical. Firefighters. What's the dumbest person you had to save in a stupid situation? I once had a firefighter tell me that he almost died in a house fire while going back into the house to look for the owner. A neighbor was concerned about why the firefighter was still in the residence, so he asked another firefighter. This is about how the exchange went. Neighbor:
Why is that fireman still in the house? Firefighter, he's looking for the owner of the home. He's right over there with the video camera. Turns out, the owner did not think it was important to alert the fire department he was out of the house. Instead, he was just taking a video of the whole event. The fire started because the owner had tried to smother his barbecue cooker flame with leftover wood from the siding that had been installed on his home. The owner did not realize it would burned his whole house down. Dummy tried to cross a 300-foot span of raging river in 0-degree weather on a snowmobile, and the machine was recovered days later. I'm not a firefighter, but I used to do a lot of disaster response work. Hurricane Floyd, eastern North Carolina. I had a farmer with a large family that refused to evacuate his house. Stubborn idiot. River had broke loose, floodwaters were coming up fast, and the police had given up on changing his mind. I drove my truck right up into his yard, rolled down the window, and asked him to dress his kids in something orange or bright yellow. He asked me why, and I said, so body recovery will be able to distinguish them from all the dead pigs floating around. He told me to F off, but 5 minutes later he had the whole family in the vehicle, and they got the heck out. The first hurricane I worked was Fran back in '96. Fran was bad, with heavy wind damage, roads closed, trees down everywhere, cars crushed, and power lines down for weeks. Floyd taught me that flooding is a hell of a lot worse. The devastation from flooding was far worse than anything Fran did. And the pigs. God, took a week to get the smell of rotting pigs out of my clothes. I couldn't eat ham for a good 3 years after Floyd. We needed to close the main connection through a forest over the winter because the trees were falling faster on the road than we could remove them due to way too much snow falling. Also, the redirection was more than an hour longer due to the snow. Some cars thought they would come through but turned around as soon as they saw the trees on the road. One semi also thought he'd get through. He drove up to the trees and called the fire brigade and complained why we didn't remove the trees. As he was calling, a bunch of trees behind him also fell, locking him in. It stood there 1 month before the trees and the snow could get removed by us, so that at least the semi could back out. We needed another month until the road was free again. Former firefighter/EMT. Easily the dumbest person I encountered was a mother of 4 who decided it would be an awesome idea to get a Facebook/Instagram-worthy picture of her kids, all under age 10, sitting in a rowboat. Mother untied it from the dock and thought she'd just pull them back with the rope that she forgot to hold on to. They floated half a mile down the river before the 2 oldest boys managed to grab a branch hanging over the bank. It was really surreal to see 4 young kids, all in matching clothing, sitting in a boat waiting to be rescued. I have no idea what happened after, but they were physically fine. Just scared, a little tired, but the mum was in full-blown panic mode and kept getting in our way. I hope she's making better choices now. I was called to her home to get a pie out of the oven before it caught fire. The lady went to the store and was delayed for some reason. She called 911 to have the fire department take the pie out of the oven and place it on the stove. The call came in as, something stuck in the oven and unable to turn off stove. Still the #1 call in 32 years. Need to get a pie out of the oven? How about someone to put out the embers in your fireplace? Ring 911 for our personal home chore service today. Years ago, we had this call straight out of Caddyshack. Some guy had gotten tired of this gopher ruining his yard. Little did he know, though, he was facing the Sun Tzu of gophers. The homeowner, dwelling upon his experience from Vietnam, decided that the best way to deal with the gopher was to treat the situation like a Viet Cong tunnel. In lieu of a frag grenade, he poured a 5-gallon can of gasoline down the gopher hole, waited with a varmint gun, and lit it off. The ensuing explosion caused a small crater to form in his yard. I'm still thoroughly impressed that there was proper fuel-to-air ratio in the network of tunnels that allowed for such an explosion to happen. However, the gopher refused to surrender without a fight. The gopher ran out of the hole, engulfed in flames, causing the guy's yard to catch fire. The gopher sprinted into the guy's shed, still on fire, and burrowed into a void space in the wall, where he died. Like the AmITheA perk from Modern Warfare, his still flaming remains set the inside of the wall on fire, as well as several flammables. In the end, the guy's backyard was ruined and about a quarter of his shed burned down, taking out a bunch of power tools and a 0-turn mower. He definitely would have saved a few $1,000s if he had hired an exterminator. I'm not the firefighter, but my brother's wife at the time was. There was this massive structure fire at a barn in town that drew out nearly every truck in the general area, like 3 towns worth of firefighters trying to get this thing under control. During all of this, there was some lady who continuously called 911 asking over and over again, "What's going on at the farm up the road?" According to her, this woman would have to be a complete moron not to realize what was going on, as the fire could be seen for miles. Fast forward later into the night, and one of the ambulances on scene suddenly leaves. Obviously not normal for this sort of situation, but there isn't much time to question it. Fast forward still, and as things are finally starting to calm down and are under control, one of the volunteers on the original ambulance comes over in his own car and shuffles sheepishly over to her and the chief of their department. He tells them that there is a woman a little ways down the road who called the ambulance, hence why they left, and requires a lift assist, but absolutely refuses to let the EMTs do it. No, it has to be a firefighter. My brother's wife, seeing that the other departments have things under control, goes with the man to see what's up. Apparently it's the same woman who had called 911 over and over again, and when they arrive, she is laying on the floor absolutely wailing. EMTs say they can't find anything wrong from what they've been able to do, but with her requested firefighter, they are finally able to get this woman up. They start asking her what happened, hoping she might be more willing to share with my brother's wife there, and she says, "I was just feeling a little ignored. I figured this would get your attention." Grown woman just laid herself on the floor, called for help, insisted on the firefighter when there was no need, all because the barn fire was getting way more attention than she was, and the 911 operators wouldn't give her the gossip about what was going on. I know she got in major trouble for abusing 911, but from what I hear from the people on both fire and ambulance, she has made a habit of calling for help whenever she feels she is not getting enough attention. I was a Navy corpsman, so this one is probably a bit of a reach, but whatever. Marine comes to sick call with seriously beaten up eggplant, like lacerations, bruising. Thing was really messed up. Asked him what he did, and he insisted that what happened was that he had a surprise boner and it hit his zipped up pants zipper and basically went all garbage disposal on his junk. Dude would not drop this narrative no matter how many times we told him that this just doesn't happen. Finally, Doc, the actual MD, comes in and tells him enough of this crap, yada yada, writes him up for malingering, need the full story. Dude jammed his wiener into the back of a computer tower. According to him, there was an opening back there, probably because old PC towers in the Navy routinely had stuff swapped out and they didn't always cover openings when things were removed. So, because he was an effing donkey, he stuck his finger in it and felt a light tingling sensation as his skin made contact with something electrical. So he took the next logical step and whipped out his eggplant and shoved it in the back of his computer. What he did not account for was that the opening had sharp metal edges. But once inside, he got that tingling feeling, so he felt like he might as well finish the job before he pulled out. Plus, and this is where I had to stop myself from laughing, he felt it was smarter to pull himself out flaccid rather than hard. Taps forehead. This was not a young man. This was not a man without rank. The men and women in charge of the defense force of your shores, America, sleep soundly at night knowing that there is no threat they won't investigate from every possible orifice. Angle. Two I can recall, one specific. The specific one was a young girl around teenage years who decided those toddler swings with the seat you stick your legs through like a little basket so the kids can't fall out was made for a teenage girl. She got stuck and lost blood flow to her legs. We had to cut her down and get her to the hospital to have it safely removed due to it basically becoming a tourniquet on both her legs. The other is general, but it's people who didn't wear a seatbelt and the people they killed as a result. You have less control of a vehicle when you're not being held in place, so those wrecks are more common as the first sign of trouble your butt moves in the seat and reduces your ability to control the vehicle. You also become a projectile. If you're lucky, you only kill yourself. If you're not, you wind up bouncing around and killing a passenger. Also, the leading cause of partial ejections and re-entry to vehicles since nothing was holding them to the seats. So many times I could have just been there cutting someone out of a seat and them being barely beat up, but instead they had been scalped and died, or hit their kid, or spouse, or family member, or friend, and killed them. One in particular I remember was a large man not wearing a seatbelt in an overturned truck. He woke up while we were working on him cutting the passenger side up to get down to him as the vehicle was on its side, driver side down. He kept asking us how his son was. At first, we didn't get it. Then we realized he was laying on his 15 to 16-year-old son, and due to the man's size, we didn't see him. The son was wearing a seatbelt, but he died because his father smashed into him and smothered him to death while we worked, rather than just wear a seatbelt extender so his seatbelt fit. Also, don't lie to us about if you wore it. Your seatbelt won't fire the pretensioners if they are not engaged in the slot.
They are designed that way. There is a circuit that is completed by the belt being clicked in place, which is also how your car knows your passengers are wearing a seatbelt or not, and sets off that obnoxious alarm. There is also a sensor in the passenger front seat of most modern vehicles to detect the weight of a small person, which is why your sodas or pizzas, or whatever, set off the alarm. Just wear the gosh darn seatbelt and don't lie. If you were wearing it, I won't be able to pull tons of slack on it when I arrive. Guess what goes in the report as the determining factor your insurance sees as to if you should have your medical covered as a result of the accident? Yep, I don't know what they do with the information, but I have to write that on the report. It wasn't really his fault, but we had an old guy in a nursing home get his balls stuck in a shower chair. This is my dad's story, not mine, but I've heard it so many times I think I can accurately tell it here. My dad was on the Boston Fire Department for a little over 35 years. For 13 of those years, he worked at a fire station in Dorchester. In Dorchester, there is a zoo, the Franklin Park Zoo. One morning in late September, they get a call to the Franklin Park Zoo for a young girl mauled by a gorilla. This is the sort of call they'd get all the time. Gorilla jumps at the glass, kid gets scared, parents panic and call 911. So they hop in the truck and ride on over. It's one of those kind of foggy fall mornings as they walk into the zoo. A couple of the other firefighters start walking into the zoo as my dad notices a man sitting on a bench holding a little girl in his arms. Assuming this is what the call is for, he walks over to the man. The little girl has a scrape on her forehead and she's crying, but is otherwise fine. The man looks like he just saw a ghost. So my dad asks the guy what's going on. The man just says, "Little Joe is out." My dad says, "What does that mean?" The man just repeats, "Little Joe is out." So my dad says, "Who the F is Little Joe?" Little Joe is a 500-pound adolescent male silverback gorilla, loose in the streets of Boston. It's right about now my dad realizes that he's not exactly qualified to handle a gorilla. But he doesn't know who to call, so he calls everyone. 2 minutes later, the fire chief shows up, not knowing what the call was about yet, and jumps out of his car saying, Mark, is this about an effing gorilla?" My dad says, "Yeah, but how did you hear that?" The chief says, "He's standing at the bus stop on Seaver Street." Now the SWAT team shows up, hats on backwards, M16s in hand, and my dad, being the smart ass he is, looks at the sergeant and says, "Hey, I don't think this thing is armed." He caught a bit of flack for that later on. Animal Control and the SWAT team worked together to take down Little Joe. It took 14 tranquilizer darts before he finally went unconscious. Little Joe is still alive and well at the Franklin Park Zoo. The gorilla had clearly seen the film Madagascar and was attempting to emulate the animal's escape and waiting for the bus. I think we can all feel a little better knowing it didn't get gunned down by a SWAT team. A motorist had a bad alternator and the car died while they were driving. The electric lock control stopped working. We were dispatched for a person trapped in a motor vehicle. On arrival, the advice was to manually lift the lock knob. You can easily tell the ones who will not survive the first 24 hours of the zombie apocalypse. Reading your story reminds me of one of mine. Called to a lockout. Get to the location and am met with, "We just need a jump start," and think, "Okay, wrong call." Get out the cables and ask them to pop the hood. "Oh, we can't. We're locked out." Driver is holding keys in hand. Passenger window is down. I start backing away, assuming some kind of theft scam. They actually thought they were locked out because the key fob wasn't unlocking the door. It turns out the fob battery had died. Showed them how to use the key after checking ID against the registration retrieved through the open window. Vehicle battery was not dead. Firefighter/paramedic in suburb of Phoenix. Had to transport a guy to the ER because he was constipated. His wife tried to dig it out with a wooden spoon. Spoon got stuck and hurt to move it. Walked in and there's a 250-pound man, butt naked, lying on his side, with a huge wooden spoon stuck halfway up his butt. My dad was witness to someone being stupid and rescued by a firefighter. My dad worked for IBM's AS400, a mainframe system, tech support division for over 10 years, 1992 to 2003. A customer called in because he needed to run a report and send it out to the networked printer. For whatever reason, the report was failing to generate and the guy on the phone was freaking out because some corporate bigwig demanded that this report be printed and on his desk by 3 p.m. Just another day at work. About 10 minutes into the call, my dad starts to hear this strange, high-pitched noise in the background. "Dad, if you don't mind my asking, what's that noise in the background?" Caller, "Oh, that's the fire alarm." "Fire alarm?" "Yeah, the building is on fire." "Far be it from me to tell you what to do, but shouldn't you get out of there?"
Dan, you don't understand. I have to get this report printed. Now, are you going to help me or not? So they continue to troubleshoot the issue. A few minutes after that, my dad hears shouting in the background. Dad, there seems to be a lot of yelling in the background. Is everything okay? Caller. Yeah, it's fine. It's just the firefighters evacuating the building. Shouldn't you have to get out of there too? Dan, I absolutely have to get this report printed. Are you going to help me? I'm not sure that I should. We pay our support contract. I have to get this printed, and you have to help me. It's almost 3 p.m. It's just a report. I don't think it's worth risking your life. The caller starts to get furious when the shouting in the background gets much louder. A firefighter has come over to the guy on the phone and starts barking orders at him to get out of the building. The caller tells the firefighter, "Look, I have to print this report before 3 p.m. and I can't leave until it's printed." Over the phone, my dad hears the firefighter scream, "I don't give a damn about your goddamn report. The building is on fire. Now move!" There is a scuffling noise and the phone handset on the other end drops to the ground as the firefighter physically drags the caller away. After that, all Dad could hear was the sound of the fire alarm and various crackling noises. Needless to say, the report did not get printed by 3 p.m. New job interview question. Would you be willing to stay in a burning building to print a report? I've gotten the impression that Americans take their jobs too seriously, or at the very least, their employers expect them to. Would you be willing to work extra time without overpay if necessary? In a minimum wage job interview. Had a drunk guy in Antarctica chase a penguin. Penguin stuck his beak through the offending drunk guy's calf. He got sent home, and a report on international treaty breach wound up on some Congress member's desk. Oh, McMurdo, how I miss thee. Is anyone else surprised at the fighting potential of penguins? Now I think about it, an emperor penguin is about the size of a hobbit, and I generally assume that any animal bigger than a medium dog can outfight me. Obligatory clarification that I'm not a firefighter, but I was working with them that day. So back in my harbour master days, the town would have a 4th of July fireworks display every year. They would bring in a barge with something like 2,000 big old mortars on it. We, along with the Coast Guard, State Environmental Police, and a few local cops with boats, would set up a stay-back area around the barge for the show. Nothing serious ever happened, so we generally sat around with the best seats in the house. So we were all sitting around there celebrating our independence by annihilating as much of the sky as the town budget would allow. About 2/3 of the way through, I noticed a small fire on the front of the barge, so I give everyone a heads up on the radio. From a distance, we see one of the crew run across the barge vomiting projectiles into the sky with a fire extinguisher in his hand. About the same time as he arrives, the fire flares up big time. The guy just throws the fire extinguisher into said fire and starts running back to where apparently they had a protected area. Before he makes it back, there is a massive flare-up explosion. Everybody hits their lights and starts hauling butt to get to the crew. We were the second ones to arrive, and one of the assistant HMs is yelling at the crew to get off the barge. There are dozens of fireworks going off, and you can feel an intense heat every single time. Balls of fire just flying every which way. The crew is refusing to leave, and one guy is yelling at my coworker that they can't because all of their belongings were on the front of the barge, where the fireworks were exploding in their tubes. The look on my guy's face was priceless. He just reaches up and starts pulling people down into his boat. I think by the time he grabbed the second guy, they all got the message and started jumping in. We all speed out of there ASAP. Somehow the only injuries were minor from them jumping into the boat, though I did hear that one of the Coast Guard boats won itself a nice hole in the roof. I never actually saw it. We then make a call to the tugboat that brought the barge to turn its water cannon on the thing. We got a big negatory from them on that one, as they weren't going anywhere near the thing. The next option was to call the volunteer fire department. The problem was that they didn't have a fireboat, just trucks. So the possibly inebriated firemen need to commandeer the local 3-car ferry and use that to get their truck to the barge. It took them about 30 minutes to get there and foam the thing down. It was a pretty funny sight watching them trundle on by, having a laugh about being on a ferry. We actually had to bring in the freaking bomb squad from the local large city, but they couldn't make it till the next day. When we finally got the report, the fire was caused by, you guessed it, all of the crew's belongings, which were apparently sitting next to the mortars and not with them behind the barrier. The kicker was all of the company's insurance and licenses, etc. were with their stuff, so they were all gone too. Just all-round fun in small-town America. What's the most MacGyver solution you've ever pulled in real life? I was in Germany in the US Army in the late 80s. We still had gasoline engine Dodge trucks. We were returning from a parts run from another base and our mechanical fuel pump failed.
We emptied the window washer reservoir and filled it with gas. We carried spare fuel with us and connected the line to the inlet of the carburetor. We used the washer button to fill the float bowl of the carb anytime the engine started to sputter and had to pull over every 20 minutes or so to top off the washer reservoir. Took us a little longer to get home, but we made it. Once, a water main burst up the road from our house, and as we were downhill, all the water began to run through the side of our property and threatened to flood the entire house. I took the slide off my sister's playhouse and took it up the road and placed it on its side and propped it up, which diverted the water far enough onto the road that our house completely avoided the torrent. Sorry, neighbors further down the road. Something similar happened to me. When I was 15, we had a water pipe bust in the garage right over the door to the house. I shut off the water at the street and then proceeded to try and unlock the door and enter the house. Broke the key off in the door. Apparently, it was already unlocked, but swollen shut. I was already in the garage with duct tape, zip ties, and WD-40 well in reach. I grabbed our chainsaw and cut the door in half. Let's just say my mom was not as impressed as I was. The second water main story is less of a MacGyver story and more of a Kool-Aid Man entry. But you do you, Chainsaw Man. Me and my friend went to a ski slope in his old Skoda. 86 model, looked like a 60s car. It was cold that night, and after the skiing, the doors of the Skoda had all frozen. My friend fixed it by pulling the rubber seal off one of the windows, then he proceeded to pee through the gap by the window onto the locking mechanism inside the door, so he could unlock it. Problem solved. I think MacGyver would have been way better if he peed on stuff in every episode. MacGyver, the Bear Grylls years. It wasn't me, but my captain. We were fishing near the Chesapeake Bay Tunnel complex, and it began to get pretty rough, so we started heading in. About 5 minutes later, something obviously goes wrong with the engine. Investigation quickly shows the belt had snapped. The engine was a Chevy 350 small block from the 70s. It is getting rougher with each swells passing. As we hurry to don life vests, our fearless captain drops trow, removes his tighty-whities, and proceeds to make a belt out of the elastic band. 2 minutes later, we are steaming back to port, thanks to Captain Commando. On a San Francisco to Paris business flight about 10 years ago. 1 hour after takeoff or so, a flight attendant announces the AV system is down and the 400-plus passengers won't be able to watch any movies for the remaining 10 hours. The passengers suddenly look like someone just died in the plane. I don't care. I'm reading that really good book. After a couple of hours, I am getting tired of the book though, and well, since I am a video engineer, propose my services to the head steward to take a look at that video system of yours. The thing won't power up. Okay, it's rack-mounted. 4 screws off with a plastic knife, reseat it inside its rack, which is a little bent by using some folded cardboard, no power cord, it's power on contact, shake it a tad, screw it back in, push power button, ta-da! The thing is back to life. The steward announces to the whole plane the great news. I am a hero and get free champagne for the rest of the flight. I walk back under heavy applause to my seat, saluting my 3 clients seated a few rows behind me. I am the mother-flipping hero of Flight AF 480. The end. Just yesterday, I used a small rock, 12 inches in diameter, and a metal rod, heavy steel, 6 foot long, to move a 1,000-pound boulder using leverage. My family was about to start looking to hire a bobcat operator. They all thought I was some kind of wizard afterwards. Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world. Archimedes. My clutch failed in the middle of nowhere. Upon inspection, I discovered the slave cylinder had a leak. In my trunk, I had these items: electrical tape, window cleaner, water, zip ties, small socket set. I did not have any brake fluid, also used for hydraulic clutches. First, I wrapped the leaking line in a double layer of electrical tape. Then I lined up some zip ties along the patch and pulled them as tight as they would go with some pliers. Now, to figure out how to fill the fluid, I had the window cleaner spray bottle and some water. So I removed the sprayer part, stuck it in the water, and primed it out. Then I just sprayed that sucker like my life depended on it to get as much water as possible out of it. Subarus have their brake fluid reservoir right next to the clutch fluid. I inserted the tube into my brake fluid reservoir, thankfully full, and aimed the nozzle into the clutch reservoir and added enough fluid to get to the minimum level. A quick clutch bleed later, I was back in business. Note, this repair was made in desperation. As soon as I returned home, I replaced the hydraulic line and flushed the fluid. It's likely the tape fix didn't do much but may have helped to contain the fluid slightly. No patch is going to hold back the huge pressure in the line. Wow, I was coming here to impress everybody with the story about the time I had fixed a blown radiator hose with nothing but an empty beer can, but after reading your post, I think I'm going to keep my pathetic little exploits to myself. I would have probably just drank the cleaner fluid or licked the car battery. I probably would have just walked, crying, into oncoming traffic. If your car dies, you die. The narrator sympathizes with the comments of the less savvy amateur mechanics following the main story, and is right there with them. If I ever even have to fix so much as a busted tire, I hope everyone driving past me enjoys observing failure in its purest and most miserable form. When I would get into trouble as a youth of 14 or 15, my mum had a lockbox with a keypad entry system where she would keep my effects – Game Boy, phone, laptop, etc. One night while I was grounded, I collected dust from our grandfather clock and coated the keypad in it. I asked my mum if she could help me wash some grapes in the kitchen, then asked to use my phone to call a friend about a group project. The water on her fingers cleaned the dust off 4 numbers, and then it was just a matter of trying the different combinations to discover the code. Helping my buddy and his wife clean up their new place, there was an old padlock on a hasp that couldn't be removed in any convenient way. I determined that it was a pin tumbler lock. I asked him for a paperclip, and while they were making fun of me, I calmly broke the clip into 2 pieces, inserted one as a tension tool, then used the other to rake the pins above the shear line, and about 30 seconds later, pop! I had the lock open, tossed the lock to my buddy, and went outside for a smoke without even glancing at them. Bond. James Bond. Hotwired some antiquated phone jack in Serbia. Post-Bosnia War, pre-Serbia NATO bombings. And attached my 56K laptop modem to it so I could access Hungarian CompuServe internet to get news from the outside world whether my team of 10 foreigners needed to evacuate or not. This was 1998. I basically ripped off a weird wall plate and pulled a pair of twisted wires out of the wall, stripped them with my teeth, years of cheapskate car audio repair had prepared me for this, and twist-wired it to 2 of the 4 prongs in my pop-out phone jack on my PC MCIA modem. Connection speed was slow, probably 28.8 kilobytes per second. I basically checked my email back to my boss, whose boss was watching CNN 24/7, or so they assured me. We stayed for a couple more weeks. If I recall correctly, the crap only hit the fan in Serbia in 1999, but it was touch and go while we were there. The diciest part was figuring out with the house's owner how much I owed him for international calls. Exchange rates were changing like crazy, and I had a mix of Serbian dinars, Hungarian forint, US dollars, and Deutschmarks. I worked for a little company that created web shops for all the big companies in the area. One Wednesday, we were supposed to push a big update onto the live servers and thereby make a ton of new features available to the public. Only problem, there was a huge rainstorm on Tuesday night, a window broke, and the whole darn office was flooded. Almost all of the computers were completely toasted and none of the workers would dare go into the office. So I decided to wade through the water and built this Frankenstein's monster of a PC, with parts from the toasted computers. No PC case, just the bare components laying on top of a desk, while standing in knee-high water. I must have checked the electricity 20 times before finally turning the thing on, while sitting on the desk. We barely managed to push the update to the live servers. In conclusion, big flood in the office, built a Frankenstein's monster PC, saved the day. 1997. Me, broke, driving my date's 1988 Buick LeSabre on the Houston Beltway, taking her home around 1:30 a.m. Sound in engine compartment, engine light comes on. I drive for a little while longer, but it's apparent it's the battery as the lights start dimming. I pull over quickly then, knowing I have enough juice to start it again if I get fixed. It's the alternator belt, one of 3 belts. We were on the elevated portion of the 290 interchange, so a long walk to anywhere. And after a few minutes with 0 people coming by, I got my courage up and asked for my date's pantyhose. Yes, I tied the pantyhose into a belt where the alternator belt should be. I debated tying both legs into a thicker belt or remove one leg and keep that in reserve. I removed one leg of the pantyhose. Damn thing worked. We kept the headlights off for most of the way. We had to travel about 10 miles and the makeshift belt lasted about 9. Engine light comes on again, and this time I was going to burn the battery all the way down and make it the last mile. We did, but I guess the juice in the battery wouldn't have lasted another mile. We were married that December. She hasn't worn pantyhose since. And then one day the alternator belt on your current car snaps. You know, this wouldn't be a problem if someone still wore pantyhose. I was locked out of my house in the middle of the night. All I had was some wire, some outdoor furniture, and a garden hose. So I used the patio chair to smash the window. Your name really made this for me. Thank you, defenestrator. I have to admit that while writing this script in the middle of the night, the misdirect on this story got a hearty belly laugh that may have woken up my neighbors. When I was in the army, I was well known as the guy in the unit who knew about computers. This was 1993 or so, and I had a computer in my barracks room. Ran a BBS, actually, but hardly anyone else had much experience with anything more complicated than a TRS-80, if that. I was assigned to the Battalion Operations Office, and we had a Zenith Heathkit 80286 machine that ran DOS, and was used to make Harvard graphics slides so that officers could brief other officers. It also had some kind of primitive RDM BS, Powerbase or something, I think. Anyway, one Saturday morning I got the CQ, charge of quarters, banging on my door. It's like 8 in the morning and I like to sleep in on a Saturday. The CQ says, "Captain wants to see you, Linz." And I'm like, what the frick did I do? Captain is the intel, not really in my chain of command or hierarchy. So I hustle my butt down to the operations office in my PT uniform, and Captain is sitting there, looking forlorn. He explains that the computer is locked with some kind of password, and he really needs to get into it so he can finish a presentation deck. I was confused because I didn't set a password, and hardly anyone else used the thing. I turned it on, and some kind of primitive BIOS computer password prompt comes up. So I pull out the manual. Going through it, it says that if the password is lost or forgotten, to send it to them and they'll reset it. I think to myself, they must have a simple way to do that doesn't involve replacing the entire board or doing something expensive. So I pull the case open and look around. I know some electronics and recognize the memory chip. This was long before DIMMs in a DIP socket. It's the only thing not soldered to the board except the CMOS battery. I go to grab the Sergeant Major's toolbox from his office. This is not a nice, indoor set of tools. This is a paratrooper Color Sergeant Major's toolbox. It's crusty, nasty, and half the things in it are rusted and dirty. Everything's functional, but you wouldn't think about getting this stuff into a computer. I grab a pair of rusty old pliers, wipe them down to get the dirt off, and while this captain is practically losing his mind, he knows he'll have to pay for the computer if I break it, I yank that chip out, fire up the machine, and it works fine. No memory chip, no password needed. I was a fricking god after that. Me and two friends locked ourselves out of the house. Looked through the letterbox and saw keys sat on a telephone table at the far end of the hallway. Rang locksmith. £100 to come out. Headed to the garage and found bamboo canes, duct tape, of course, and an Allen key. 5 minutes later, we have a 21-foot pole with a hook on the end. Fed it through the letterbox, hooked the keys, carefully lifted them through the letterbox. Danced. One time I was camping, and after firing up the grill, we realized that we did not have a spatula. As a solution, I shoved a beer can over the end of a stick and smashed it with a rock. It worked like a charm. Repaired a laser missile tracking system in Balochistan on a hot 130° Fahrenheit day with a Swiss Army knife, leather belt, wire coat hanger, and a pocket handkerchief. Damn circuit had shifted. Opened it up with the Swiss Army knife, used wire to jumper the melted connector, leather to insulate, handkerchief to tie it all up. Passed the launch test. Went back and fixed it with actual tools and spares the next day, but I felt like Angus all day. I was on a date once and I had a rusted 1974 Impala. I had to unstick the butterfly valve on the carburetor, so I used my mascara wand to unjam it. Wow, 4 marriage proposal comments answering this story today. Not too shabby. Sorry guys, getting married in 20 days from today. I understood maybe 10% of the words here and I'm still oddly turned on. I'm a straight woman and I swooned. I'm a lesbian and I doubly swooned. First at the 1974 Impala, then at her. Female watchers, we appear to have stumbled upon a surefire way to make everyone fall in love with you. Now go brush up on those mechanics. When I was 14, I went to visit my grandparents for a week, as I did every year. Being old, they didn't do all that much. Most evenings revolved around NYPD or Law and Order and eating pound cake with cherry ice cream. I don't like cherry ice cream. Anyway, they had one of those old-school cable boxes with the buttons and the knob and 3 rows of channels. Also, being old, my grandparents went to sleep by 11, leaving my pubescent and hormonal self to explore the house for, as I've always called it, jerk material. Fap material in the parlance of the times today. There was a Sears catalog that likely had my fingerprint on every page, along with other bodily markers and fluids. My imagination, I use that a lot, kids today don't realize, but we used to go around taking mental snapshots of every single female chest and piece of exposed flesh we could to store it up and use it later during our alone time. And of course, scrambled softcore adult flicks on channels my grandparents would never subscribe to. One night, frustrated by the lack of material to inspire my fifth stiffy of the day, I experimented with the cable box. And let me tell you, I hit proverbial gold. I found that if I pressed down 2 channels next to the scrambled channel and then fiddled with the tuning knob, I could almost get a clear picture with real girls that had real bazongas that were really exposed. Sure, sometimes it would get into a negative picture, and sometimes, right at the point of teenage euphoria, it would scramble really bad and I'd lose my stride and need to get started again. But it worked, and it worked well, and to this day, I will never find success rigging something like I did with that cable box. I was the same way as a kid. I put so much effort into scrounging up spank material. As a horny adolescent back in the 90s, I didn't have internet or access to adult flicks, save for a lone Playboy that I wore out over the course of a few months. But I did have HBO and a VCR. I would figure out which movies had scenes of nudity and when they took place. Then I'd look to see if the movie was playing late at night, when everyone was asleep. I would set my alarm for when the movie played, sneak up to the living room and pop in a VHS tape and record whatever adult fun time scene I could find. I made sure to put it all the way toward the end of the tape so no one discovered the little compilations I was making. Never underestimate the resourcefulness of a horny 14-year-old boy. Without a doubt, we could probably get a group of 14-year-old boys together, say a dozen or so, deprive them of their own alone fun time for 2 weeks, and then tell them they can go to jerk to their heart's content after they build a bridge or cure cancer or something. Stuff would get done. Was backpacking and slipped down a cliff. I ripped my chest open pretty good and was about 2 days from medical. I had a basic sewing kit in my backpack and stitched myself up. The stitching held until I got back to civilization a couple of days later, and the doctors commented on how good my stitches were. Still have a big scar, but it is an awesome story. I actually held part of a submarine together with duct tape for an entire deployment. Seriously, not kidding. It wasn't the actual shaft itself, but there was a piece of it that broke and we didn't have the parts to repair it. Without those parts, the shaft itself would not be able to rotate without becoming irreparably damaged. So we used duct tape to rig it so the shaft could rotate freely, and then instituted a series of checks to make sure the rig, which was meant to prevent seawater leaking in, wouldn't leak too much. It did leak a lot, but we could just pump the bilge water overboard without a problem. Yes, I am American, and no, I will not say which submarine. I was like 17 and the school day had just ended. Everyone was in the parking lot getting ready to leave. A girl I liked couldn't get her car started, so I went over to try to help. I don't know much about cars, but I saw the battery had a lot of corrosion on the terminals, and when I popped open the battery, noticed it was pretty dry. There was a little kid nearby, so I gave him 50 cents and told him to go get me a Pepsi without giving a reason. I used some of the Pepsi to fill the battery cavities, and some to completely clean the terminals. The car started right up after that. It only took half a can, so I finished the rest. 'Cause, I was 17 and didn't realize that something that can do that to a battery might not be the best substance to ingest. Anyway, I'm pretty sure this is what led to my first post-high school job, designing airplane parts with her dad's company. I had a huge rock that was in my driveway, and it seemed like every year it would get pushed up a little bit more, to the point it was becoming a huge hazard. We had gotten estimates to jackhammer the thing, making the driveway passable, but they wanted between $800 to $1,000. I had remembered reading something about Hannibal's expeditions, where they would put hot coals on a large rock and then douse it with freezing water, and then smash it with a blunt object, fracturing those boulders and allowing Hannibal to continue his trek, and decided to try it. I took a bunch of charcoal and basically baked this huge rock for about 30 minutes, and then immediately threw a ton of ice water onto it, resulting in a loud pop. Then I hit the rock with a sledgehammer, and the rock exploded into a million pieces. I definitely got a kick out of putting some ancient science into application. A few years ago, my roommate, who wasn't on the lease, lost his job and bailed on me. Needless to say, this left me in dire straits. I got behind on bills and the electricity was promptly turned off. Cue ingenuity. The apartment complex had 2 light bulbs outside each door that came on each night on a timer. To cure my infinite boredom in a dark house, I brought a couple of those screw-in adapters that turn light sockets into standard power outlets, plugged extension cords into them, and ran them into the house. Bam! I instantly had television, a lamp, a fan, and could charge my phone, and all on the complex's dime. Not my proudest moment, but it felt pretty crafty. I lived in a third-floor apartment with a key-coded foyer door and a keyed apartment door. That day was spent at an outdoor festival, and by the time I came home, the combination of sun, dehydration, and exhaustion, plus the little bit of beer I had before sobering up and venturing home, had me struggling to stay upright and not vomit. Unfortunately, right around that point was when I realized my apartment key was no longer on my keyring. Cell phones are notoriously unreliable at this festival, and even if I could have gotten in touch with my friends, I'd lost it in a relatively wide patch of grass. There was no way that key was coming home. Convinced I was about to spend the night in my laundry room, I found a piece of rusty wire in the parking lot and picked up my apartment's lock. It took about 15 minutes. More distressing than the ease of entry was the fact that no one asked why the disheveled, wobbling girl was in the hallway picking a lock. What was your "I was the only one to get away" story? Loads of people at a pub in my town that was notorious for not IDing, so I had loads of underage people in there drinking. It was their busiest night of the year and the police raided it. Most people ran out the back and some hopped the fence. The rest tried to hide in the toilets. I just sat there drinking as the police came through the pub, pulling everyone out of the toilets and back inside, IDing them all and taking names and addresses. The people who had jumped the fence decided to stand on the corner just outside to wait for their friends who hadn't been so lucky, they thought. Next thing they knew, the police had come outside and started IDing everyone stood on the corner, like they had inside. Myself and two friends, one of age, the other, like me, not yet 18, had just sat there through the entire incident, drinking our pints and joking on with some of the better-natured cops. They didn't bother IDing anyone who hadn't run, so I was one of the very few friends who got away with it scot-free. This is beautiful. My best friend from college used to say, "If you act like you own the place, you own the place." We used to do crazy stuff and no one would say a thing, because we acted like nothing was wrong. I was gambling in Vegas on a Friday with a friend's bachelor party coming up the next day. Playing blackjack, mostly just killing time waiting for dinner, but the table was on fire. It was a full table shortly after I sat down. I played a couple of hours and the table was all up on money, anywhere from $50,000 to $800. The $800 was me. Everyone else was literally up at least 10 grand. It's about 20 minutes before I'm supposed to meet up with someone, so I call it and head back to my room so I can shower and change for the night. Head out for dinner and have a good night. The next morning my buddies call me down to the lobby to meet up. As I get down there, out of sheer coincidence, they're talking to the dealer that was at the table when I left. She says, "There he is," and points at me. Friends are like, "Holy crap!" Turns out I was the only one that walked away from that table with $1 to my name. Someone taught me that the moment the dealer mentions how well you're doing, it's time to quit playing. High school party, one of my first. I was wasted, throwing up in the basement bathroom when the cops arrived. Eventually, they were let inside and stormed into the basement where everyone was hiding loudly with the lights off, with their flashlights beaming down into the dark. I want to say there were at least 30 people rounded up into the living room where they started calling parents. The host of the party saw me sitting on the mantel, having accepted my fate. She knew my dad would literally whoop my butt and sent me out the window. I knocked over the grill on my way out and walked around the back of the house, through a few backyards, and to the neighborhood pool where I cuddled up with some bushes for a few hours. When I saw the last cop finally leave, I sprinted back to the house and knocked on the door to be let in, scaring the crap out of the 3 survivors. A few dozen people were charged with underage drinking. Big house party. I drank the wrong drink, got rehypnol, went to my car, and passed out for the rest of the night. Everyone was on this big deck and it collapsed. Then the cops showed up and acted like total members even though people were injured. I slept in my car through the whole thing. For clarity, it was in Vancouver, BC, Canada. I suspect roofies because I was on my second drink of the night when everything started feeling really weird. I knew something wasn't right, so I decided to go out to my car and sleep it off. I barely remember this. I was informed by a friend the next day why I went out to my car. Smoking up in a truck with some friends of a friend senior year in an empty parking lot of some park. Already high as frick when suddenly the Taco Bell we had gorged on earlier is going berserk in my bowels and holy crap, I need a bathroom. I ran or stumbled my way to the public restroom on the other side of the parking lot. I finish, and as I'm about to walk out, I see what looks like red lights illuminating the entrance. I start losing my mind. I know it's cops, and everyone's high as frick. At this point, I knew A, my friends are effed, B. What the frick should I do? I retreated in the furthest stall and texted my parents saying I was crashing at some dude's house. Ended up falling asleep in the stall. Woke up the next morning and got another friend to pick me up. Got away, no one ratted me out, and that's how Taco Bell simultaneously destroyed and saved my butt at the same time. Good God, the two exceptions to the substances that are almost entirely negative in their effects on human subjects, Rohypnol and Taco Bell. Consider yourself very lucky, and oh my God, I am shooketh. Freshman year of college. I had a group of friends that I'd smoke with. Towards the end of the year, I decided I didn't feel like smoking anymore, and also I had to get clean to apply for summer jobs. By this point, they are getting more and more cocky, and start getting high in this girl's minivan in a campus parking lot. One day, I meet up with these guys to hear that they finally got busted. It's not a surprise to me because doing that in a car on campus is freaking stupid. And here is the most important lesson, kids. The school brought my friends in and presented them with a list of names. Every single dealer we knew of, even the ones we didn't use, was on that list. My friends were given the choice between expulsion or pointing out the dealers they knew on the list. Cops didn't really care about a few stoners smoking on campus, they cared about the dealers. So if you're thinking about making some extra cash selling illicit substances in college, make sure you're as careful as possible, or just don't do it. People will always choose to rat you out when given the choice between that or their expensive college careers. I was on holiday in Bali. A policeman flagged us down as we were waiting at traffic lights on our rented mopeds. I just decided to buzz it through the now green traffic lights. They got pulled and fined a fair amount for driving without a license. I felt a bit crappy afterwards, but they said they would have done the same if they had the balls to. We also had crates of booze which I didn't want taken off me. In summary, I choose beer over my friends. My first house party in college was on Halloween my freshman year. Naturally, everyone was in costume and about half the people were underage. I wasn't drinking, but my friends were. Around midnight, an older guy, 40s, walked in dressed as a cop. Me, being one of the few sobers at the party, realized he was an actual cop. I tried to convince my friends to leave, but they all said the guy was just in a costume, so I left on my own. I walked right past the cop, told him to have a good night, and walked home. I found out the next day all of my friends got tickets for underage drinking. I was abducted in Iraq while working in IT, along with 4 other people. After 946 days, I was released. Everyone else taken with me was killed. This is an article I wrote about my experience. That can be found at the forum in the video description, folks. That's a step up from the people here who got in trouble with the cops. I went to a private high school and was part of a group of about 20 people who knew about a tent hidden in the woods behind our school. People would go there and do the deed after school, smoke green herb, and do hood rat crap. Someone got in trouble and ratted out all of us in an attempt to lessen her punishment. Apparently, she was also going to be expelled, on the last day before finals. We all got called down to the detention room, and the dean told us that they had found drug paraphernalia and weapons, an airsoft pistol, and made us all write down everything we knew about the tent, and who we've seen at the tent. 19 people ratted out everyone in that room, including themselves, and were given pretty harsh punishments. 3 were expelled, some were suspended into the next year, and the rest got demerits. I wrote down, "I have no idea what you're talking about." Went and talked to the deans and said the same thing and was off the hook. I'm certain my name was on every list, and I'm sure they wanted to nail me, but I denied, and I guess they were satisfied with 19 people giving themselves up. My very first college professor gave me advice I remember to this day. First day of English class. Don't record it, don't write it down, and deny, deny, deny. One time, my psychology prof was in a bad mood, so he started asking everyone for their student ID. Rules say you have to show it to a uni official if they ask for it. I didn't have mine that day and didn't know what the punishment was, but I knew I wanted none of it, so I tried to get out of it. So what to do? I applied psychology. Before he gets to me, I walk up to him and ask him a question. When he comes around, he just points at me and mutters to himself that he'd already checked me. It wasn't a sure thing. If he had asked for my ID when I asked the question, I was screwed. It required careful timing to ask the questions before he saw me, so he was already thinking about that by the time he turned to face me. In the end, something like half the class didn't have their ID that day. Turns out all they do is tell you to carry it. As our friends in the first story pointed out, confidence is everything. Well played, university student. Well played. Years back in high school, my buddy threw a huge party. Unfortunately, not just our usual group showed up. It was well over 100 people. Anyways, I was always on the lookout for cops or shady people. I had my reasons as to how screwed I would be if I got caught drinking. Sports, school, family, scholarships, etc. So the party goes on, more and more people we don't normally hang out with show up. So I grab my buddy and our DD and say, we need to leave now. You can crash at my place, I don't care. Let's go. We hop into his car. That's when I throw a duffel bag of beer drunkenly into his trunk, followed by the sound of tabs popping up and beer spilling. We pull out and drive away. We get a quarter mile down the road before we see 4 cop cars headed to the house. The party was immediately shut down. Countless tickets written. People kicked off sports teams or clubs. What's funny is this same scenario happened 2 other times in high school. I left a party before the cops busted everyone and people got tickets the day before graduation. And another time I left a kickback which ended in the arrests of a few friends. My reputation still holds true. I always leave minutes before the cops arrive. I leave minutes before the cops arrive, said the narc. Only narcs call people narcs, narc. Was at a real big Fish concert. We'd been following the tour for a while. Undercovers caught my dude rolling a doobie in the car. Then the other dude with us was coming by. I'm throwing as many GTFO, son, looks as I can, but they popped him for having pills when he came by. So everyone I was with, including the dude who owns the car, got arrested. Thousands of miles from home. As the smartest in the group is getting cuffed, he asks the cops to give me his keys and their tickets. So I had a pocket of concert tickets, a car that isn't mine, and like $100. Took the car, bought a couple of 100 bottles of water, and a few 30-packs and went back to the concert. Sold all the water for $1 each, most of the beers for like $3 each except for the 15 or so I drank, and scalped every ticket for like $120 each. Showed up at the jail with a random girl from the concert, kind of a little worse for wear, and bailed all my friends out on ones. Then brought them a hotel room. Can't leave my people behind, man. Turn up in the school washroom with my friends, with the lights off and the music blasting out. People were hanging off the stalls and making as much noise as possible. Teacher comes in and writes our names down. She gets to me and asks, have I already written down your name? To which I say, yes, and walk away. Friends got detention. Apparently someone cracked the mirror in the washroom and no one fessed up, so they all went down together. Drunk with a few friends, walking through the docks/trendy bar area, and see an industrial building for recycling plastic, with a tantalizingly easy-to-climb roof. We climb up on the roof. Someone reports burglars on the roof, because recycled plastic and trash must be a big target, and cops show up. I casually climb onto a tree that overhangs the roof and quickly pass out, and the cops don't see me. My friends don't rat me out, they get banned for life from a bar in a completely different area of the dock complex, because the cops told them they caught them trying to cut a hole in the roof/burgle them all. Utter bullcrap, we were stargazing and drunk chatting. Anyway, I woke up a few hours later and asked why they left me up there, and I'm reminded of the whole cop thing and informed they weren't arrested but were banned from a bar. We went to the bar the next day to make a point. High school party. The girl decides to spread her legs and have adult fun with 12 guys in a room. I passed out before my turn happened. They all got chlamydia. One night, quite a few years ago, one of my buddies threw a party with about 50 people. We were mostly all under 21 at the time and had a few other illegal substances as well. Soon enough, the cops showed up. By the time they had opened the doors, I found myself a nice tool bench to hide inside where the opening for the chair was. So this was in the garage, and they also had black lights in, so it was difficult to see clearly. So the cops started to give people breathalyzers, all the while I'm crawled up in this little hole for hours. After about 2 hours, they finally load up the last wagon, and I think they pull away. I throw out my legs, which are completely asleep, and right after, I hear the cops starting to head back inside. I crawl back in as they started to take pictures and dump out the alcohol. The best part about this is that with the black lights, the flash from the camera gave better sight of the room. I have a friend that works in the police station that told me you can see me scrunched inside this little area on one of the pictures. The cops apparently weren't even angry, just laughed and said they were somewhat impressed. We've had some pretty lighthearted stuff so far, so I'll just warn you that the next story is a little grimmer. I'm the only one left from my group of 3 best friends since 3rd grade. First one hung himself because he was a pain pill addict, and I think the pressure of addiction and owing a lot of people money got to him. Ate a ton of Klonopins and hang himself up on his mum's porch with a dog leash. My wife was dating him when I met her, and I always joke about it when people ask how we met. I say she was dating my friend, and I stole her, and when they ask if we're still friends, I get quiet and say, he offed himself. Second one was a smack addict. Wrecked his car bad when he nodded off, and he lived. After getting home from the hospital, he shot up again and nodded off while eating cereal and choked. His mom found him blue in the face. He lived, but is a completely different person who will never be independent again. The third one just died recently. He was the most badass person ever. Had so much fun in a life he loved. He was that dude on your social media you lived vicariously through. Badass chicks every month. Awesome road trips to Mexico one week and Alaska the next. He loved living the biker life. I couldn't even cry when he died because he died doing what he loved. He had literally said to me that he would rather die on his bike than doing anything else. Anyway, this will probably be buried, but it felt good to write. I've been off substances, except drink, for a while now, and my wife and I are really happy. Glad I made it out of that town alive. Definitely miss my bros, though. We had some great frickin' times. During school, my friends and I sat at the same table. They, and me, had a food fight. However, I sat at the perfect angle to where lunch people couldn't see me throwing food. I didn't get caught, and the rest of my friends had to clean the tables for a week and got detention. Lollapalooza a few years back. Me and my one friend and about 10 other random kids were walking around the festival looking for a place to hop the fences and sneak in because none of us bought tickets. We finally find an area where there are only a couple of security guards. There was a dozen of us that hopped this tall fence at the same time. Little did we know that the Chicago police security tent for the festival was right where we all hopped the fence. As soon as we hopped the fence, about 8 cops came running out of nowhere, and at least half the group is on the ground with security holding them down immediately. The security firm had some athletic, jacked types. The cops get the other 4 kids after about a 15-foot intense dash. I swear kids were getting tackled left and right. These cops and security were literally spearing kids into the ground and shoving their faces in the dirt. It was insane. Me and my one friend make it about another half a block and run into another fence. This time, 2 cops are chasing us. As we are hurdling the second fence, one grabs my arm and tried pulling me down. I shimmied my way onto the other side. We see one more scalable fence and hop that too. At this point, we realize that we're backstage for Eminem, and we head into 2 porta potties backstage for about 10 minutes to hide out just as the show is starting. We realized the cops have better things to do and probably quit searching for us. We head up the side stairs to Eminem and literally get to the side of the stage. Nothing better than an adrenaline-filled sprint hopping multiple fences and making it on stage with Eminem for free. My friend's Southern Comfort pint didn't fall out of his pocket, so we had that to drink on. Nothing beats being 18 without a care in the world. It was like sneaking into prison. So here's my crazy story. So my freshman year of college, me and a couple of buddies ended up getting a house together. Mistake 1. We would routinely host parties that would become way too out of control to handle. One night, we were having our Halloween bash thing and planned on having maybe 100 to 150 people. So beforehand, we decided to go in on a couple of ounces of green herb and make brownies or smoke until we couldn't see. We ended up getting so high that we forgot we were having people over, as well as the fact that we had made herb brownies. 11 p.m. rolls around and there's a knock on the door. We're all freaking out thinking it's the cops, so nobody went to the door. About 2 minutes later, someone walks in from the back door, which we had apparently left unlocked. Turns out to be a good friend who's there for the party, along with 20 other people. So they head to the basement to get drinking and whatnot. This literally happens once every 5 minutes until we have a line out the front door and onto the street. At this point, I'm way too high to want to have anything to do with this, so I'm sitting on the couch watching a documentary on ancient aliens on Netflix. This continues for about 2 hours uninterrupted until I get a call from a friend of mine saying there are 4 cop cars headed down my street and that he just turned around. So now I'm freaking out and I head downstairs and shut the music off and turn the lights on, attempting to explain to this crowd of people that there are cops coming and they are going to be very angry and to leave. Of course, nobody listens except the guys with warrants who go sprinting down the alley. As soon as I make it upstairs, I hear my roommate yelling, saying not to answer the door. The police are here. So my first instinct is to try and hide, but then I remember the weed brownies. I grabbed them out of the fridge and darted upstairs as fast as I could to our attic entrance. The way our attic was set up was that it was accessible via what looked like a regular closet door, but was actually frickin' Narnia, and that's where I wanted to hide. I get in the attic and we had moving boxes in there, so I made a fort out of them and just kind of sat in there, listening to everything that was going on, eating an entire pan of brownies. Mistake number 2. The cops ended up clearing the house after some drunk moron let them in. They gave practically everyone underage a ticket, leaving breathalyzer strips all over the house. They gave so many tickets, I could hear them joking about running out and going back to the cruiser for more. 2 of the girls that got underage were actually Norwegian tennis players on scholarships who also had to get their stomachs pumped. They are no longer playing tennis. After they'd cleared the house of partygoers, they had all of my roommates in the living room yelling at them about how many times they've come out here and about how it always smells like pot. Then I hear at the bottom of the stairs, "If there's anybody out there, come up right now!" And I'm crapping my pants. Then the footsteps. At this moment, I'm literally melting into the floor, drawing parallels between myself and the story of Anne Frank. The cop opens the attic door and shines his light in, but I'm hiding like a damn ninja and probably says to himself, "Screw that, I'm not going to look that hard." Long story short, all of my roommates ended up spending the night in jail for various illicit substances, drinking, and maintaining nuisance, or whatever the cops could think of, and I spent my night hiding in the attic, which to this day we refer to as Anne Franking. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, linked at the top of the description. And if you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot, linked in the description too. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.